Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The beginnings of a future pirate king. What if Luffy was never entrusted to Garp, but instead raised by Whitebeard? Follow a different journey where Luffy grows up surrounded by one of the most legendary pirate crews in the world. Chaos, laughter, brotherhood, and belonging await, all while Luffy still dreams of becoming the king of the pirates. Big shout out to the warlords of this channel: Rodarius Jones, Native Warrior, Claude Lifrace, Neo Wesker 23, Derek Doughty, Zazu Saez, Abdul Raf Ali, N3WT, What If Lord, Black Money Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Case Clark, KSGPL4YZ, and Brian McKenzie. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
Nami was staring at the waters as the sails took her towards her home island. Her heart was beating fast in her chest, knowing what awaited her back home. While she was worried about reaching her home and seeing the man who had haunted her life for many years, she worried about the boy with the straw hat she had left behind her. Luffy was strong, she knew that, but she still worried that his carefree nature could be a little too much sometimes. She also feared that he didn't take his fights seriously enough, and that could become a problem for him. Overconfidence kills the fools who think they're invincible, so she knew that Luffy was strong enough once again for the people here on this ocean. But Arlong was a different type of strong. Luffy, please be safe, she whispered to the wind, hoping for it to be true that he would be safe against the opponent that he was facing so he could come after her soon. Belmere, it's almost over. Luffy was on that small boat with Sanji, and one of the two friends that used to follow Zoro. You guys don't seem to understand just how scary this guy is going to be, do you? Yosaku asked. Johnny had gone with Usopp and Zoro to show them the way, while Yosaku stayed to lead Luffy and the cook as soon as possible. Does it really matter? Anyone who threatens a beautiful lady deserves an ass-kicking, Sanji said, bringing up plates of food for Luffy to eat, hoping to get the teenager as much energy in him as possible to fight again. But you guys don't understand. This guy just isn't anyone, he's Arlong, a fishman from the Grand Line. Yosaku yelled at them, but Luffy shook his head, not caring. Arlong, Luffy tried to think back and remember if he had ever met anyone named Arlong. He's scary strong, maybe even for you, brother Luffy, he said, but Luffy was still trying very hard now to think. His cheeks were beginning to turn red from the effort. Stop thinking so hard and eat, shithead, Sanji said, slapping the boy, who bounced a bit at the impact before grinning and stuffing his face. No matter who it is, we'll fight them. Sanji placed a plate in front of Yosaku as well, who screamed that he was still too worried to eat right now. You guys need to be more careful, fishmen are on a whole other level than us human beings, Yosaku said while eating, since Sanji had reminded him that the food was not to be wasted. Ya no. Luffy began with food in his mouth. Most don't like it when you talk about them like that. He finished his mouthful, swallowing it and giving Yosaku a look. So you boys really don't know who Arlong is? He asked them as both shook their heads, meaning no. How the hell don't you guys know about someone like him? As much as he liked Sanji and Luffy, their naivety on this crazy man was too much for him to handle. I'm not from the East Blue, so I never really had to worry about pirates here, Luffy said, raising his hand up and smiling. He never bothered our restaurant, so I didn't really care either, Sanji admitted, causing the man to drop his head at them, worrying about their sanity. Then it's time I gave you boys a lesson on who you're going up against, he said to them as Luffy nodded, glad to get some information on his next opponent. Arlong is a man who would destroy anything in his path all over the Grand Line. He started as Luffy scrunched up his face a bit, really trying to think if he knew the man. He can't be that strong then, I mean I don't know of him, and I was raised on the Grand Line. Fishman, you know, I've heard that the females on that island are some of the most beautiful creatures in the world, Sanji said, hearts forming in his eyes while thinking about it. The mermaids? Yeah, I guess they're nice, Luffy said as Sanji turned his head quickly towards Luffy. You've seen such beauty, and have never told me. He grabbed Luffy by the shirt and shook him, but Luffy looked away, annoyed. "It's not that big a deal, really," he said as Yosaku coughed, getting their attention back. The reason they call the Grand Line the Pirates' Graveyard is because of Arlong, and the other powers that rule over it. The first of the powers is the warlords. Those guys are pirates authorized by the government, he said, and Luffy frowned. He knew of the other emperors like Shanks, and his pops, but Ma hadn't told him about the warlords. These guys can do as they want as long as they help out the government. The government gives them protection as long as they come when they're called. These guys are strong though, they didn't get to where they are if they weren't. The guy who beat Big Bro Zoro was also one of them. At those words Luffy's eyes widened. His uncle was a warlord, and hadn't ever told him. When he saw his uncle again he was going to kick his ass or let Zoro do it. It was more whoever got to him first. The warlord that we need to focus on right now is a pirate named Jinbei. He continued as Luffy was already freaking out about Uncle Haki not telling him, but now Jinbei as well. What about him? Luffy said in a quiet voice, annoyance hidden behind his cheer. He's the strongest fishman among the warlords, causing as much destruction throughout the Grand Line as Arlong has. He continued on, but Luffy frowned. Jinbei was a pirate, he knew that, but the whole super destruction thingy didn't sound like him much. It said that Jinbei let Arlong loose on the East Blue so that he could have a position within the warlords. Since then Arlong has taken control of around 20 islands. His power surpasses people as strong as even Don Krieg. He shouted at them, but Luffy wasn't happy with this. Why then would Nami want anything to do with this guy? Sanji asked, but Yosaku shook his head. She wants his bounty, I suppose. Haven't you idiots heard anything I've said though? Fishmen are dangerous. He shouted at them as Luffy stood up, and looked out towards the sea in the direction of his home. Jinbei's not a bad man, he said, catching the attention of the two in the boat. Luffy? Sanji was curious, knowing Luffy had probably met a few big names being on his pop's ship. He let Arlong loose here. He has to be a bad guy, Yosaku said, but Luffy shook his head. I don't know Jinbei and Arlong's past, but what I do know is Jinbei is like one of my brothers. This stunned Yosaku that Luffy was talking about a warlord like this, let alone a fishman. How about I tell you guys how we met, and you can decide from there, Luffy said with a big grin, and Sanji nodded, standing up. I'll prepare more food, it'll be a little while before we reach Nami's Swan, Sanji said, letting Luffy jump around in excitement for a good story and some good food. You've really met Jinbei? Yosaku asked Luffy, who nodded his head excitedly. Yeah, quite a few times really. Jinbei isn't the only fishman brother I have. Namur has helped me out so many times I can't even count them anymore. Luffy laughed, now missing his brothers once again. When Sanji returned a short while later, he had plates of food for everyone, and once he had handed them all out he sat down, giving Luffy a nod letting him know he could start. My story starts. Luffy, age 10. Luffy was bouncing all around the Moby. Excitement buzzed through his entire being. What's wrong with him? Sabo asked Marco, who was waiting patiently for Luffy to get over his excitement, but he should know better than that. We're on our way to Fishman Island, Yoi. Marco knew they had a little ways to go before they reached the place to coat their ship. Fishman Island? Sabo asked, catching Ace's attention. That's right, you boys only briefly saw the island years ago. Thatch had come up beside them as well, picking Sabo up and sitting him on the railing. Why didn't we stop last time? Ace asked, because he remembered going under the water, but not actually stopping long enough to look around. Because as much as we wanted to, the Marines get really anxious when we're in the first half for so long. We wanted to make sure you boys were able to handle the weather changes before moving for Thong to get back to the New World. Made Marines jumpy and the government watchful. We didn't want to stay long just in case something happened. Thatch said to Ace, putting him beside Sabo even if the boy complained about being picked up. But we're going now, right? Luffy asked, still bouncing on the balls of his feet. Yeah, we'll be making a stop there this time for sure, Yoi. Marco knew Luffy really wanted the candy Fishman Island was famous for. Why are we going? Ace was curious. Because Pops is meeting with one of our allies. Thatch smiled, excited to see his old friend again. Allies? Sabo asked. MN. We have a lot of people here in this family, and some of them are sailing on their own ships protecting Pop's territories. Fishman Island is under Pop's protection, so our good friend Jinbei will be meeting us there, even if he doesn't like returning to that place too often. Thatch said, laughing a little at Jinbei's reluctance on returning to his home island. Why doesn't he like coming home? Luffy asked, this time never meeting this man before, so he was interested. Because he doesn't want his reputation as a pirate to cause problems for the people Yoi, Marco said with a small smile. But he's friends with Pops? Luffy asked carefully, needing to know if he had another sibling or not. Yes, he's good friends with Pops Yoi. Marco smiled and Luffy gave his small laugh. Then he's friends with me. The trip to the island to get their ship coated was fairly quick since they had traveled this way many times before, and knew what current would get them there faster. I'm hungry, are we there yet? Luffy pouted, leaning on the railing as many chuckled passing by. You know we aren't, Luffy, be patient, Thatch said, passing a plate of warm cookies to the boy, who brightened up on the sight and smell of fresh treats. You're the best brother ever, Luffy said through mouthfuls. I'll need that in writing, Luffy, Thatch said with a grin, but you could almost see the question mark over the raven-haired kid's head. Why? But Thatch shook his head, laughing at his own joke. Never mind, Brad, make sure to share those with your vultures, I mean brothers. He pointed his thumb back towards Ace and Sabo, who were following the smell of the cookies Luffy had. Pops was smiling down at his youngest as they fought over the cookies, happy to see them so cheerful. Fishman Island should be a new adventure for those boys. Aizu had come over to check on his father and youngest siblings. Luffy has experienced it before, so it will be his job to show his brothers around. Pops was giving Luffy some responsibility and a chance to take the lead from his older brothers. Will Marco be going with you to see Jinbei? He asked. But Pops chuckled, knowing that even though he was giving Luffy the responsibility, Marco would be following his every step while on that island. I see, it might be a nice idea to introduce the brats to Jinbei. He might like them. Jinbei was a good fishman who cared for his people dearly. Luffy would like the man that was guaranteed. Pops, we're here, Yoi, Marco called from up above, a small smile on his lazy face. So how does the coding work? Sabo asked curiously as Aizu smiled, leading the boy away to explain exactly what was going on. So we'll be going soon? Luffy asked Pops, that smiled and nodded down at the boy, that then jumped around in excitement. I can't wait, Luffy cheered and ran off. Once the ship was coated and ready to go, the crew set off for Fishman Island. Marco smiled at the little pile of sleeping kids on the main deck. They tired themselves out with all that excitement. Thatch smiled, shaking his head. It's good. Let them rest so they have enough energy for when we get there, Yoi. Luffy still enjoyed naps, especially when there was nothing to do. Ace was prone to narcoleptic fits throughout the day, so all members were prepared for one of those at all times. Sabo was more of the silent type that chose to read while his brothers napped. We'll wake them when we get there, Thatch said, leaving the boys alone, Marco joining him, because as much as he loved his brats, he too enjoyed the peace and quiet he got when they were sleeping. Luffy yawned and stretched, pushing Ace off of him, letting his head hit the deck hard. Luffy, I swear, he growled out, rubbing the sore spot, but his eyes widened when he saw the view around him. We're here, Luffy cheered happily, jumping up, completely awake now. Sabo, wake up. Ace pushed his brother a bit, letting the blonde slowly yawn and rub the sleep out of his eyes. Why's Lu yelling? He asked before Ace just pointed with a smile. We're here. At a docking area on Fishman Island, a blue fishman was waiting, his arms crossed, a look of worry on his face. Pop saw the man and stood up, letting his sons know what was happening. Jinbei, Pop said with a smile as the man nodded in Pop's direction, a smile on his own face. Old man, it's been a while, he greeted as Luffy ran off the ship towards him. Jinbei stared down at the small child's surprise on his face. He had heard they had a brat on board, but didn't think he'd actually be that young. Who are you? Luffy asked in excitement, his head tilted back so he could look up at the tall man. My name is Jinbei, he said, and Luffy giggled. I'm Luffy, nice to meet Cha. Aw, these guys are Ace and Sabo. Luffy pointed to his brothers, who were walking off the ship and standing on either end of Luffy protectively. I see, he said as Ace glared at the man, his arms crossed, letting him know silently that if anything happened to Luffy, there'd be big trouble. I didn't know you brought brats so young onto your ship, Jinbei said, but he couldn't remove his eyes from the cold ones Ace was giving him. The look was too harsh on a boy so young. These guys aren't just brats, Jinbei, they're our brothers. Thatch had come beside Ace, putting a strong hand on the boy's shoulder, letting him know it was safe for him to relax. I have some news for you, Jinbei started, but Pops put his hand up to stop him. "News can wait, why don't we show the children around?" he asked as Jinbei was startled while Luffy jumped and grabbed the fishman's hand. "Show me around some more. I've only seen a few places so I need to see more." Luffy cheered as Jinbei looked down at the boy in wonder as Pops and many others surrounding them smiled, knowing the feeling he had right now. "You're old man, and I need some time to talk, Luffy-kun," Jinbei said, but Pops laughed. "Take the boys around, show them your home, Jinbei. You know where to find me when you return," he said, leaving Jinbei no room to argue. "You don't want to show us around?" Luffy looked up at the man with big watering brown eyes, and before Jinbei had the heart to say no, Marco swooped in, grabbing the boy around the middle, picking him up. "He'd love to show you around. Mind if I come as well, Yoi?" Marco asked Luffy, who wrapped his arms around Marco's neck in happiness. "MN. Sounds like an adventure," Luffy chirped. Ace and Sabo sighed, knowing that Jinbei almost fell into Luffy's strongest attack. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Jinbei asked the boys, but only Sabo smiled. Luffy's puppy dog eyes have gotten a lot of strong men to do weird things. Marco might have just saved you from some worse fate than showing us around, Sabo said as Jinbei looked at Marco, who was hugging Luffy tightly. "I've never seen the commander look like that before," he said softly in awe. "Trust me, it's a look we're quite used to now," Thatch said, which caused Jinbei to become interested in this child that had won over the hearts of a notorious pirate crew. Walking around the island with Thatch, Marco, and the brats was in a weird way fun for the fishman. Luffy was interested in anything that had to do with food, or fun. Sabo wanted to know the history of the place as often as possible, but Ace was more interested in just looking around silently, catching the eyes of a few mermaids' men and fishmen before they turned away quickly. "Nay, why are he?" asked. He was walking beside Thatch, and Jinbei frowned slightly. "Because in the world there's a rift between the fishmen and the humans." Thatch whispered quietly, but was feeling a bit sad, because he had hoped with Pops being around that might have mellowed out a bit. "They're not used to seeing human children. Mostly pirate crews pass through here, and they rarely carry children on board," Jinbei said to them, but only Ace and Sabo were listening. Luffy had smelled something super fantastic, and chose to follow his nose rather than stay with the group. Letting his nose take him to the wonderful smell, Luffy didn't realize he was being followed by some weird fishman. Jinbei had noticed Luffy's absence, and waited for Marco, or Thatch, to become aware of it as well. Marco was in a deep conversation with Sabo while Ace was getting a rundown on the history between fishmen and humans. Jinbei realized in his own way that if they noticed Luffy was gone, a panic might break out, so sneaking away, Jinbei began his own search for the little straw-hatted boy. "Meat, meat!" Luffy cheered, climbing up on a stool, drooling at the smell that was coming from behind the counter. "Right up!" the guy said. His eyes lingered on Luffy for a second too long, but Luffy didn't take notice. He just wanted his food. "What's a human brat doing here all alone?" some guy said, causing Luffy to turn and look at him, giving a blank face. "Kids your age shouldn't wander off," he said, taking a few steps closer to Luffy, his smile growing slicker each moment. "Because if they do, people like me will take them away," he shouted, aiming to grab Luffy, but the boy aimed his fist and punched him in the face. "Why, you brat?" the man shouted as Luffy jumped from table to table, avoiding being caught by the guy. "When I catch you, I'm going to drag you up to Sabaody and sell you for a decent price," he shouted as Luffy laughed, jumping once again away from the man. "Is that really what you're going to do?" a voice that Luffy had just come to like asked, causing the little boy to jump into the man's arms. "Why, you're Jinbei," the man said. Luffy laughed a little as Jinbei looked at the man. "This brat would cause you more problems than you'd like if you managed to sell him," Jinbei said, not looking away. "Why, he's just a stupid human brat," the man shouted, pointing his finger at Jinbei, who laughed. "Brat he might be, but he's one of Whitebeard's brats. Do you really think you have the strength to stand up to his old man?" Luffy just smiled. He was proud that he was able to actually hit someone with his punches. Maybe he was getting better after all. "TCH, that brat isn't worth it," he scowled, beginning to walk past Luffy, but stopped for a moment. "I'll remember this brat. Someday when you come back here, I'll make you pay. I'll make all humans pay." Then he continued to walk out the door. Luffy grabbed onto Jinbei's clothes tightly, but the man patted him on the head. "And that guy is supposed to be one of the king's guards. What is Neptune thinking keeping Hody around with that attitude? Jinbei scowled, but then looked down at Luffy who had big wide innocent eyes. You came here for some food, right? Then let's grab some and go. Your brothers are probably worried by now. Luffy nodded his head, but his admiration for Jinbei had just risen to Nakama level. Once he had his food, and he had calmed down, they walked back towards the ship where the old man was. Luffy held Jinbei's hand the entire time, refusing to let the man go, which Jinbei found was rather interesting, but also charming. When they got back to the ship, Marco and the others were there looking worried, but seemed to be okay. Luffy! Ace yelled, anger in his voice as all eyes turned towards the boy who was holding tightly onto Jinbei. Luffy, why did you wander off? You know it's not always safe, Yoi. Marco scolded, but Jinbei held up a hand. We just wanted to have a small snack, there is no reason to worry, Marco, he said as the man sighed, looking down towards Luffy. I swear you like to worry us all, don't you, Yoi? Marco asked. But Luffy had his eyes on Jinbei now. All is well? Pops asked the fishman, who nodded, patting Luffy on the head. Big Ma'am has been sending people towards this island on a frequent basis. I'm not sure what she wants, but it's a good idea to keep an eye on this island just in case, Jinbei said, relaying the message he got to the old man. I see, we'll keep a better eye here, but even that woman should know to stay away from my territories. I shall send her a polite warning, Pop said as a few of the members chuckled at the polite warning bit. That is all I have to report, if there is anything else I shall come straight to you, Jinbei said, and they nodded, now ready to enjoy their time on this island before returning back to the new world. Everyone began to move back towards the deck, but Luffy stayed put, a look on his face no one had ever seen before. Nay, Jinbei, Luffy began, all waited to see what he was going to do before a large smile broke out on his face, even though the seriousness was still in his eyes. Join my crew. Many eyes widened at those words, even Pops was caught off guard. Luffy, a few people whispered softly, but Jinbei looked down at the kid, looking really hard at him to see if he was serious or not. You're what, 7, brat? Jinbei asked as Luffy smirked. I'm 10. He clarified, and Jinbei nodded. You have plenty of time to grow then, kid, he said, and Luffy frowned slightly. No one moved while the serious air surrounded their youngest brother. Are you saying no? He needed that answer clear. I'm saying that once you've grown up more I'll consider your offer, Luffy-kun, but for now not yet. Your old man protects this place, and I shall help him in any ways I can. Jinbei needed Luffy to grow and experience the world before he was ready to have anyone on his crew. So someday, right? Jinbei nodded, knowing that might be as close to a no as he could ever get. Then someday, Jinbei, you will join my crew, Luffy said, forming a bond in his mind before running back onto the ship looking for more food. You have an interesting family, old man, Jinbei said, but even he had been won over by the child. I wouldn't have it any other way. Marco and Thatch looked in the direction Luffy had run, but a weird feeling was in their chests. Luffy wasn't acting like the boy they knew and loved, he was acting like a captain would. They could see a grown man asking another of equal strength to follow him in the way Luffy stood his ground and spoke to Jinbei. He's growing up fast, Thatch whispered to Marco, because Ace and Sabo had decided to follow their little brother in search of a snack. If he does get Jinbei, he'll become quite the force to be reckoned with, Yoi, Marco smiled. I have a feeling he'll be that with or without Jinbei. Come on. Let's go stop our brats before they eat all our supplies, Thatch said as Marco followed behind him, smiling because he rather liked the idea of Luffy becoming strong enough to ask someone like Jinbei to be one of his nakama, and could only hope he got to that strength. That was so beautiful, Yosaku cried out, wiping his eyes with his sleeves. Jinbei must be a good guy if you asked him to join, Sanji said, taking in a puff of smoke. He is, and that's why I don't think him and Arlong are working together. It's not like him to do stuff like that. Luffy smiled, hoping to see his old friend again someday. Looks like we're almost there, Luffy said, seeing an island up ahead. Then let the fun begin. Oi, I think that's the Mary, Usopp shouted, looking in the distance, hoping beyond hope that he was right. The closer they got, the better Usopp could make out the wonderful shape of his beloved ship. We actually caught up with her, Johnny said in surprise, but a small smile was beginning to form on his face. Zoro, we're almost to Nami, so hold on a bit longer, Usopp said to the swordsman, who was actually sleeping, trying not to think about his injuries. Nami was leaning on the railing of the Going Merry when she heard a voice she didn't expect to hear. "Usopp?" she asked, looking around, finally seeing a small boat with the long-nosed sniper waving frantically at her. "Usopp!" she yelled, running to the helm and turning the ship slightly to meet up with the sniper. "Nami, we finally caught up to you. I didn't actually think we would," Usopp said in delight, almost wanting to hug the girl in relief, but valued his life a little bit. "Where's Luffy?" She looked around, not seeing her captain, but her eyes landed on Zoro and widened. "Zoro? What happened?" She helped Usopp and Johnny get Zoro onto the ship carefully. "Luffy's fighting Krieg," Johnny said to her once Zoro was in a steady position. "Usopp, go grab the first aid kit quickly," she shouted, and the sniper saluted her before running off. "He's fighting Don Krieg, and you guys just left him there?" she was shouting, and removing Zoro's shirt at the same time, freezing when she saw the injury. "How is he still alive?" she whispered as Usopp returned with the first aid. "He said he could handle it, so I trust brother Luffy," Johnny said, hoping Luffy was stronger than he sometimes looked. "I hope you're right," but she knew it would take a lot to take out Luffy. Cleaning Zoro's injury and stitching it up as best as she could before applying some ointment and fresh bandages, she sighed. "As long as he doesn't go running into another fight, he'll be fine until we can get him to a proper doctor." Nami sighed as Johnny and Usopp moved Zoro to a bed inside the Merry. Once they had returned, they looked at Nami, who was frowning. Her eyes looked tired and sad. "What's the plan, Nami? Should we wait somewhere for Luffy to catch up?" Usopp asked, but Nami shook her head. "If I'm away too much longer, Arlong will start to think things. In a nearby village I have a sister who can help you out for now. I have to go to Arlong. Once Luffy gets here we'll come up with a plan together," Nami said as they got closer to the island. "What's your sister's name so we know how to find her?" Usopp asked, and Johnny nodded excitedly. "Knowing her, she'll find you first." Nami smiled, dropping it, knowing her sister's personality well. "Whatever happens though, please don't confront Arlong until Luffy arrives," she asked as Usopp nodded, having no intention of going up against the fish man if he didn't have to. Sighing, but taking them at their word, Nami pointed to the closest beach, saying they were to drop anchor there. "Luffy will be here soon, I promise," Usopp said to her comfortingly, and she nodded. "Follow this trail, and it will take you to my home village, but be careful," she said, throwing her backpack over her shoulder and walking away from the Merry and her friends. "Zoro should be fine resting here, right?" Usopp asked Johnny, who nodded, thinking Zoro was too injured to move. "Should be. It'll probably be better for him to rest as much as possible," Johnny said, worried for his friend. "Luffy will hopefully be here soon, so let's go check out the village and see if we can find Nami's sister," Usopp suggested, and Johnny nodded, following Usopp along the trail to unwanted and unknowing danger. Zoro woke up a few hours later, yawning and needing a good drink. "The Merry?" he asked, looking around, sleep still in his eyes as he took in the ship. "When did we catch up to the witch?" he asked, looking at the island in front of him and smirking, placing a hand on his chest to feel the injury he received. He stopped in slight shock. "That damn woman," he said, the smirk still in place as he fingered the bandages, feeling them carefully. "I'll be paying out of my ass for these stupid bandages." He was still grateful for them though. He knew Usopp hadn't done them, because he had proven he knew only a bit of medical knowledge, while Nami had proven she knew quite a lot back with Johnny and Yosaku. "Which way to the village?" he asked himself before walking along the trail and making a sharp left into the trees. Luffy was jumping around the small boat in excitement, because he could see the island up ahead. "We're here," he shouted, ready to get into whatever was next for him. He had promised Nami he would help her, so he would. Sanji was cleaning up the dishes from their meal when he felt the boat stop rocking slightly, meaning Luffy had stopped moving. "What's wrong?" he asked, knowing Luffy couldn't sit still for very long. It's been a while since I've seen a sea king like this," he said, looking at the cow that had appeared next to them. Luffy wasn't afraid of sea kings. He actually found them quite fun to bother and then eat later on. "What is that monster?" Yosaku shouted and pointed, but Luffy smiled. "That's lunch." He was drooling again, thinking of the good meat this big fish could bring. "Like hell it is, you just ate, shithead." Sanji said. He had a few dishes in his hands as the sea king looked towards him. "You wanted some of this lunch?" Sanji asked the monster that nodded its big head before opening its mouth, trying to eat Sanji whole. Then show up earlier next time, you shitty fish, he shouted at it, kicking it in the face. Don't you dare try and eat my chef, Luffy growled at it as well, punching it in the jaw, knocking it down. Just what type of monsters are you guys? Yosaku asked, looking at Luffy and Sanji, who both stared at the giant fish cow. Nay Sanji, Luffy said, a look of glee crossing his face that Sanji had come to know wasn't a very good thing. Back home I heard that some people use sea kings to pull their ships. If we tie some rope to this guy's horns, maybe we could get to Nami faster. Luffy said the idea. But all Sanji heard was, get to Nami faster, so he was all in for this idea. Sounds good, Captain. He saluted, running to get the rope. You guys really are crazy, Yosaku said as Luffy just laughed, not denying that at all. Usopp was running for his life, which was actually pretty normal at times. He had saved a man from being killed by one of the fishmen, and even though he knew what he did was a good thing, he really didn't feel like dying before getting to the Grand Line. Of all the times I need Luffy, he isn't here to help me, Usopp almost screamed as he tried to get away from the fishmen that were chasing him. I know, I need to hide somewhere. Usopp thought his idea was quite clever as he jumped into a bush and tried to still himself as much as possible, so they walked on by. Damn, that long-nosed human sure can run, one of them said while the other nodded and continued on looking for him. I actually did it, Usopp said in wonder as he saw the fishmen leave him all alone in that bush. That was lucky, a voice said, leaning on a tree, causing Usopp to jump from the bush and point his slingshot at the woman. You scared me, he said, taking a deep breath to calm his beating heart. Sorry, but the fact that you got away after a stunt like that is a miracle at best, she said, but smiled at him, brushing a strand of purple hair back. My name is Nejiko. What is an outsider like you doing here on this island? She asked him seriously, because not many people came here anymore. We're here to help a friend, Usopp said carefully, not too sure if he could trust this woman or not. I see, it's best we take this somewhere else though. She knew that the fishmen would be on the lookout for this guy now that he had attacked one of their own. My house isn't too far from here, so why don't we talk there? She said, and Usopp nodded in agreement, not wanting to be caught out in the open right now. At your trying to help? She asked as Usopp followed behind her. Oh, her name's Nami, Usopp said, but missed the way Nejiko's eyes widened in surprise. Nami, huh? She whispered softly. Nami is one of our nakama, and our captain said she asked for our help, so who are we to turn our back on her? Nejiko suppressed the smile, but barely. That's interesting. Nejiko knew Nami didn't ask for help, so for this guy to say she did was rather surprising to her. She told us to look for her sister, but with all the mess that happened I guess we got a bit sidetracked, Usopp admitted, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. Oh, and did she give you her sister's name? Nejiko asked, humor in her voice. Nah, she said that she would find us first. Nejiko laughed at that, because that was a Nami thing to say. She was right, so let's talk about this a little later, okay? She smiled as Usopp's mouth dropped a little bit, so he just nodded and followed her the rest of the way to her home. Once Usopp got there, he couldn't help but look around, because this was the place Nami might have grown up in. So you're really Nami's sister? Usopp asked, wanting to clarify that information. Are you really her nakama? Nejiko asked, countering him, but Usopp didn't pause to even think about the answer. Of course, he said as Nejiko felt the conviction in his voice. What is she like when she's with you guys? She asked him, walking towards a picture that held a good memory for her. She laughs a lot, but is really scary. She keeps us together, I mean, we've got a really childish captain that's really strong. If we didn't have Nami, we'd probably be able to fight people still, but we'd probably end up lost along the way, he said, smiling at his little family. She laughs, huh? Nejiko said, putting the picture down. Looking out the window, she turned to Usopp. Do you know the kind of trouble she causes people? She needed to make sure they knew they might have been used. Yeah, Usopp said quickly, startling Nejiko. Well, kinda actually. Luffy knows a lot more than I do. But, Nami said she needs help, so we'll help her no matter what. Usopp wasn't Luffy and couldn't promise to kick people's asses, but he would promise to help her kick some ass. He just didn't want to be the one to start the fighting. I see, Nejiko said, smiling, now glad to know Nami had met some good loyal people, but more importantly that Nami had begun to open her heart again. Luffy's here, Usopp said, standing up, looking out the window now. Nejiko watched him carefully. You mean you can see him? she asked looking out the window as well, but Usopp shook his head. You can always tell when Luffy's nearby. Usopp started. Nezuko watched silently, not understanding. Because when Luffy arrives somewhere he brings with him this weird feeling like anything could be possible. He also knew that his observational skills were getting sharper the longer he was with Luffy and Zoro. Shall we go meet him then? She asked, and Usopp nodded in excitement. Probably best we find the rest of the crew as well. If they're here, we have a swordsman who's supposed to be resting, but knowing him we'll be searching for days before he turns up. Usopp laughed, walking out the door, leaving a confused and intrigued Nezuko behind him to follow. What strange friends you've discovered, Nami, X. Whoa, how do we get this shitty thing to slow down? Sanji yelled, holding onto the railing as the sea cow began to drag them towards the island at an alarming pace. She, who cares, faster, Luffy shouted in glee as the other two held on. I think I might be sick, Yosaku shouted as the sea cow flung them in the air towards the island. Luffy closed his eyes, loving the feeling of the wind through his hair just like when he was a child. Suddenly the ship began to drop from the air. This isn't going to be fun. Luffy, if we survive I'm going to kill you, Sanji screamed as they hit land and dragged into a few trees. Luffy jumped off the ship once it had stopped, dodging a kick to the head with ease. Get back here, Luffy, and take your punishment like a man, Sanji yelled, jumping off as well as Yosaku slowly began to pull himself back together. What, it's not like this was all my idea, ya know. Luffy whined a bit, then blinked, because it looked like Zoro was under his foot. Luffy, it growled as Luffy came to the conclusion that it truly was Zoro he had just stepped on. Ah, sorry, he said, rubbing his head, placing his hat on at the same time. Where the hell did you guys come from? Zoro growled out at them, Sanji taking notice of the swordsman. Oh look, it appears we ran over a ball of moss, he said, looking down at Zoro with a bored expression on his face, lighting up a new smoke. Who's the swirl brow? Zoro asked, pointing his thumb at the blonde. He's our cook, Luffy said cheerfully before running towards what looked like a path. Swirl brow? Sanji growled out as Zoro stood up. Sorry, would you prefer dartboard? Zoro asked him seriously, only to get a kick aimed at him, so he blocked it with his sword. Stupid ball of moss, Sanji growled under his breath as Zoro smirked. Oi, stop fighting, and let's go find Nami. He was waving his arms at them, trying to get their attention. I'll deal with you later, Nami comes first, Sanji said, dropping his leg, glaring at Zoro. Luffy, Usopp, and Johnny might be with her, Zoro said, since he did wake up on the Mary. You guys actually caught up to her? Luffy asked in mild surprise, and Zoro smirked. Yeah, we did. He was looking at the new cook, rubbing in that he got to meet up with Nami first before him. We had our own problems to deal with, Sanji said, biting down on his smoke. Excuses. Then they couldn't have gone far. Luffy began to look around, walking along the trail, hoping to run into anyone. Luffy continued down the trail until he saw what he was looking for, Usopp waving frantically at his friend. Usopp began to run towards Luffy, happy. And here I thought you'd never show up, Usopp said to Luffy, a large smile on both their faces. Now you know that's a lie. Luffy chuckled as Nezuko watched the both of them carefully. Oh, what an outstanding beauty I see before me. Sanji swirled towards Nezuko, hearts in his eyes as the woman just watched him. Who are you? Luffy asked her as Usopp introduced her to the others. You're Nami's sister? Luffy asked, wanting her to verify that information. I am. Do you boys even know what's happening on this island? She asked them as they all shook their heads. I'm only here because Nami asked for help. She's my navigator, he said, making sure she knew that Nami was with them as their nakama. You really expect to go up against Arlong without knowing anything? Are you all stupid? She asked them. Yosaku and Johnny had met up again somewhere along the way, and nodded in agreement with Nezuko at their stupidity for wanting to take on Arlong. Let me tell you the story of Nami, and the story of what has happened on this island, she said to them, but Luffy crossed his arms over his head and walked to a tree to nap. No thanks, if she wants to tell me anything I'll listen, but that's her choice, Luffy said, not caring about someone's past unless it came straight from their mouths. Completely ignoring the group, and letting sleep take over him, Luffy thought a nice relaxing sleep would be great before a battle, but he was wrong. The moment sleep took over Luffy, a strange nightmare crept into his mind. Luffy was looking around what appeared to be Thatch's room. On the bed he saw himself so young and Thatch standing up talking angrily with Teach. Teach, I thought you were supposed to be on watch? Thatch said, confused. Luffy felt like he wanted to interfere knowing what was coming. I am commander, I was wondering though, just what are you going to do with that devil fruit of yours? He asked Thatch, a slick grin on his face. Luffy himself began to shout at Thatch to slam the door in the man's face, but his voice was silent no matter how loud he screamed. I'm going to throw it into the damn sea, now get out, Thatch yelled, pushing Teach back, but it didn't do much. Luffy tried to help his brother, but his hands moved right through the large man, so all he could do was watch as Teach stabbed Thatch, pushing him to the ground. Luffy leaned down to check on his bleeding brother, his hands passing through the older man. Luffy knew now that he was older that Thatch was going to be alright, but seeing this now, remembering it, really hurt. This isn't real, this isn't real, this isn't real, Luffy said to himself, but like before his voice had no sound to it. I'll be taking this, commander, Teach said, picking up the box that held the devil fruit. Take it, and rot, bastard. Luffy thought, glaring hard at the man who had turned his attention to the smaller Luffy on the bed, who was shaking in fear. Thanks for not screaming, little Luffy, you really helped me out, zihahahaha, he laughed before leaving. Bastard, Luffy shouted as the man left the room, the door falling closed as darkness took over Luffy's mind once again. Waking up with a start, a cold sweat was on his brow as he took slow, sharp breaths trying to calm himself down. Zoro was sleeping beside him by the tree, but his breath was even, and his eyes opened slightly, looking at Luffy from the corner of his eye. Shifting slightly, Zoro brushed his shoulder onto Luffy's in a comforting manner. I'm okay, Luffy said, but Zoro refused to move from his new place. Standing up, everyone looked at Luffy, who didn't make eye contact, just announced he was going for a walk. That was strange, Usopp said, watching Luffy's back, but Zoro was staring harder, worry on his face, not used to seeing Luffy like this. He'll be fine, please continue, Negico Swan, Sanji said, hearts still there, but Zoro's eyes remained in the direction Luffy had walked. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I haven't thought about that in years, so why now? Luffy asked himself out loud as he kept going on the trail, not really seeing where he was going, just walking. Luffy. He looked up, bringing his mind back when he saw Nami running towards him fast. Nami. You actually came. She sounded surprised, so he took a bit of offense to that tone. I said I would. He let her hear the hurt in his voice. I know, it's just, no one had ever cared enough before to chase after her. She took a look at him and frowned. You okay? She asked him, seeing how pale he was, also how he looked away from her at those words. Yeah, I just had a bad dream, that's all, he said, but she didn't look away from him. It must have been pretty bad to scare you, of all people, and if it did scare him, she knew it would have had a worse effect on her. I'm alright, just haven't had dreams like that in a while, he said as they walked together a bit. Luffy, listen. She started as he stopped walking. I want to try and do this on my own first, she said to him as he raised a brow. I needed to collect a lot of money to free my village, and I've done it. I can do this first, Luffy, and then you can step in, she said, but Luffy frowned at her. Nami, you asked for my help. He needed her to let him help her, but he wouldn't force her. I know, but not just yet, just a little bit more time, I promise, she said, and Luffy nodded, but still didn't like it. Maybe it was because of the dream he had, but a weird feeling was settling in his stomach, and he wasn't sure he liked it or not. Sighing, he smiled at her kindly. Alright, but you know where to find us if you need us, he said, getting her to smile before she ran off towards Arlong Park. I'll at least check out the village, there's gotta be something interesting around here until I can fight, he said, continuing his walk all alone. He got to the village, and saw a bunch of people getting angry about something, but it wasn't his place to step in, so he found the closest tree, and sat down under it. Should I try for another nap? He asked himself, but growled a little at the very idea of another nightmare, especially one with that bastard in it. Maybe I'll just not sleep, but try and sleep, he said, nodding to himself, happy to have come to a good decision before closing his eyes once again. Negico had left the group alone since they had made it pretty clear that they weren't going to back off from Arlong. We won't do anything until we've been given the okay to do so, Sanji said, blowing smoke, but smiling. Luffy is our captain, so it's his orders we're waiting on, but since he's decided to take a walk, we'll have to wait, I guess. Usopp sighed as Negico smiled. Then I'll leave you alone for now. She wasn't going to force them to leave since they clearly weren't going to, But she wasn't going to encourage them any further either. If they wanted to fight Arlong, then they could do that on their own. "Thank you for telling us the story of this island, Miss Najiko," Usopp said to her as she laughed, giving a wave as she walked away. "To think that Nami has suffered so much for all those years," Sanji said, taking a deep inhale of smoke to calm his nerves. "This entire island has suffered." Usopp looked around, but even in the shining sun he could feel the sadness in this place. "We should go find Luffy," Zoro said, standing up from where he had been sitting pretending to sleep while he thought about what was wrong with his captain. "He said he was going for a walk, and this is Luffy, he'll be fine," Usopp said, but Zoro wasn't listening as he began to walk away. "Damn it, Zoro. You can't go off by yourself," Usopp shouted after the man, who looked back and grunted at him in half anger and half confusion. "We don't have all year to look for you when you get lost," he finished as Zoro shouted back at him. "Oh, the moss head can't even take a walk without someone to hold his hand?" Sanji asked, looking at Zoro, who was ready to bring out his blade to shut this newcomer up once and for all. Oi, can't we save the fighting for later?" Usopp said, trying to calm the argument that was brewing. "Luffy is probably waiting for us, so let's go already." Usopp knew the word Luffy could stop Zoro momentarily, but he wasn't sure if it would stop Sanji. "TCH, fine," Zoro said, because he was worried for his friend, but mark his words, he would cut that cook later. "I wonder where he went off to," Sanji said, looking down the trail. "And Johnny and Yosaku have wandered off as well." Usopp looked around, not seeing the other two people that were in their group. "Well, whatever, you said we should go find Luffy, so let's do that." Sanji looked up to the darkening sky, thunder rolling in the distance. "Let's go before the storm hits." Luffy was coming back from a nice dreamless sleep when he heard the chaos around him. "What do you mean?" a woman shouted, causing Luffy to open his eyes slightly and stare at the scene in front of him. "Nejiko's been shot by the Marines," another said, causing a roar from others around. "The Marines have been bought out by Arlong, there's nothing we can do," someone said as Luffy frowned and stood up, going over to see what was going on. "Nay, what's the problem?" he asked a few people who had never seen him before. "Who are you?" they demanded at him, so he replied in the Luffiest way possible. "I'm Luffy, Nami's friend," he said, and they stared at him. "You're really a friend of Nami's?" a man with a pinwheel on his hat asked, and Luffy nodded, smiling wide. "MN, she asked me to come here to help." He was never good at hiding his intentions from people. "Then you probably know her older sister was just shot," someone said as Luffy blinked. "But I thought that lady was with my friends." She must have left, I guess. He didn't know how long he had been napping for. While everyone was freaking out, Usopp, Zoro, and Sanji had found where Luffy had been while they were talking. "'Bout time we found you," Zoro said, but he was giving Luffy a look only they knew. "I'm alright," Luffy answered his friend, who nodded but still stood by him. "What's wrong?" Ep asked, crossing his arms and looking around, taking in the scene of angry people. "Nay, when did Nami's sister leave you guys?" Luffy asked suddenly, causing the small group to look at him in question. Just shortly after you left for your walk," Sanji said, thinking about it. She had finished her tale and warned them a little, but then left. Why was it a big deal to Luffy? "Apparently she was shot," Luffy said as everyone froze, even Zoro stilled, and eyes narrowed at the information. "Was it Arlong?" Sanji questioned, already not liking the fishman. "I heard it was the Marines," Luffy replied, but they all fell silent as Nami came into view with Nejiko following beside her, bandages wrapped around her middle, her arm over the injury protecting it. "Stay here," Luffy ordered, walking towards Nami, who wasn't thinking straight right now. "Nami," Luffy said, walking up to her, but she ignored him as the town people began to become enraged. "Everyone, don't worry, it'll all be okay, I promise," she said, but the look in her eyes froze Luffy in his tracks, anger filling his entire being. "Nami," a few people said in sadness. "How dare that man take advantage of you, and all your hard work," one shouted. "Arlong never intended to free her at all. He was just using her," someone else shouted as Nami shook her head. "It's alright, honest, I can just gather it all up again, really, and it's not that big a deal." She tried to reason with herself and the others, but Luffy wasn't having any of it. "You know what you need to really do, Nami," Luffy said, crossing his arms and standing beside Zoro. Luffy wouldn't act unless she gave him permission, and he would wait for as long as she liked. "Nami, we can no longer allow you to sacrifice yourself for this village," a man said who had scars all over his body. "He's right, Nami, you've got some pretty good friends here now, so go with them, and be free. You have a dream, don't waste it on us," Nijiko said, standing beside the man as the villagers began to gather any kind of weapon they could to face Arlong. I won't let you," Nami had snapped. Something in her was breaking down as she pulled out a knife, pointing it at the man. "You can't stop us, Nami, so go," he said, grabbing the knife, showing his resolution to fight Arlong, then walked past her with the villages and Nijiko to fight the fishman. Nami fell to her knees, her eyes wide, and whatever was left of her control faded and snapped as she grabbed her arm where a tattoo lay in anger. That markets, Luffy knew of pirate marks. Heck, he had one of his own on his lower back. "Arlong," she shouted in anger, her eyes turning towards the knife on the ground as she grabbed it and began to hack at her arm, shouting his name. Luffy realized quite quickly that the place she was attacking was the mark on her shoulder. If Luffy didn't like this fish man before, he really hated him now. A pirate mark was meant to show that you belonged to a family. Much like his mark showed his love for his ma and pops, and the others he called his family, Nami's appeared to be the exact opposite of that. Nami's mark appeared to be one more towards pain rather than love, which sickened Luffy. Having enough of her actions, Luffy grabbed her wrist, no longer allowing her to harm herself any more than she had. "Luffy," she looked back at him, his hat overshadowing his face, but his mouth in a straight line, showing hardly any emotions. Nami dropped her hand, letting the knife fall to the dirt road, her anger spent, but the deep sadness still there. "Luffy, I worked so hard. I'm such a fool for trusting that he'd keep his word. I can't believe that I honestly thought I could do this on my own," she cried out. But Luffy remained silent, letting her say all she needed to. "You have no idea about anything that's happening here on this island. You don't truly know of the things I've suffered through for the past 8 years, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But Luffy once again remained silent, waiting for her to give him permission. Even the others who were watching from a distance were waiting for Luffy's orders. "Luffy, please help me," she said, looking back at him, so he did what he knew needed to be done. Taking his hat off his head, he placed it upon Nami's orange hair, startling the girl. "I already said I would, didn't I?" he asked her, and she nodded, pulling the hat tighter upon her head protectively. "Everyone, let's go." Nami watched as Luffy and the others began their walk towards Arlong Park. Touching the straw hat that sat on her head, she tried to hold back another round of tears at the symbolic meaning this hat held. This hat was Luffy's treasure, and here he was entrusting it to her as he marched on to fight her demons. "Luffy," she whispered, her eyes set in the direction he and the others were walking. This day was one to be remembered in the eyes of this island, because of what Luffy will do here, but for her it held another meaning. Today was the day her small ragtag friends with different goals and personalities just might have truly become a crew. Here they are ready to fight for me, and my village, my family, and I'm just sitting here crying. Nami scolded herself lightly, placing her hand on her bloody arm and wincing at the sudden sharp pain she hadn't felt before. Standing up, she walked towards a house she knew the doctor had lived and searched for some bandages and cleaning ointments to hold herself together for now, since she didn't have time to just sit here and do nothing, not when her nakama were about to go into battle. The way to Arlong Park was silent, but you could feel in the air something was coming. The clouds were dark, threatening a storm above, but the rain feared falling on this group of angry pirates. The villagers waited at the gate reluctantly, because they had been blocked off by none other than Yosaku and Johnny. "You don't understand, we have reason to fight," the man with the pinwheel on his hat shouted at the beaten and bloody pair who were blocking their way with their swords. "No, you guys don't understand. We came here to fight for Nami, sis. After hearing her sad story, we lost by a hair, but we know a few people that won't," they said, looking at the villagers who were quite confused by their words. "Who would be brave enough to fight Arlong?" someone shouted in the crowd as the men smiled. "Them." Luffy and his group were coming over the hillside, but Luffy stopped walking to turn back, suddenly surprise in his expression as Nami came running towards them. "Nami," he said, looking at her carefully, but she took a few deep breaths before looking up at him, her eyes strong though red-rimmed from her tears. "I'm fighting with you," she said as Luffy tried to convince her to let him and the others fight and her to rest. "This is my battle more than it is yours, Luffy. Let me fight to protect my family," she said seriously to him, knowing the word family would catch his heart, and it worked. Protect my hat while you fight, I want it back in good condition, he said, turning away, and looking at the crowd watching them. Luffy left his hat with Nami, because he knew that if she had it she would do anything to protect it, causing her to be a bit more careful, and less into the danger. You guys. Nijiko said, looking at them surprised as well that Nami was walking beside them at the end of fierce determination in her to fight and win back her home, and this time she'd do it with the strength of her family, her nakama. We were waiting for you to come. Johnny said, their swords crossed together as Zoro looked down at them, not smiling though his mind in battle mode. I'll be taking these, he said, simply grabbing the blades from the ground to use since his own two were destroyed by Mihawk. Once Zoro had his swords, and the crowd had parted, Luffy punched the wall down to Arlong Park, and walked past the rubble towards the many startled fishmen. Oh, it looks like we have some company, Arlong said, carefully leaning back on his chair, and looking Luffy over. The kid didn't look that strong, but the hole in his wall proved otherwise, so he eyed the boy. But his eyes wandered over to the straw hat sitting on top of Nami's head. Nami, care to explain? He asked her, but it sounded more like a threat. No longer will you reign over this island, she shouted at him, being beside Luffy, and the others had given her a new form of strength. Oh, and who do you expect will change that? Arlong asked sarcastically as his group laughed along with him. I will. Luffy stepped forward, looking the man over. And who are you exactly? Arlong asked the boy, who wasn't smiling. I'm Luffy, he said before moving faster than expected, and decking Arlong in the face, sending him backwards into the wall. And I'm here to kick your ass for hurting my navigator, and making her cry, Luffy said to him as Arlong got back up, pissed off at this brat. So you've actually decided to betray me, Nami, Arlong said to the girl who pulled out her wooden rod, and pointed it at him. Betray? I was never your nakama from the start, she yelled, the straw hat on her head fluttering carefully. A few of the stronger fishmen walked forward, standing in between Arlong and the small group of pirates. So you think you can come in here and take my navigator away? Arlong asked Luffy as Zoro jumped to take on the octopus fishman, and Sanji stepping in to take on another, removing them from Luffy's path. Usopp shot his slingshot at the one fishman that had chased him earlier as Nami pointed her staff at him as well. I'll back you up, Usopp, she said, but he looked at her from the corner of his eye. That's what I wanted to say, damn it. Even though he was a bit stronger, there was no way he wanted to fight any of the fishmen in any way at all. Take her? She's not a piece of property, Luffy said. Ever since his nightmare, Luffy's been on slight edge, so being near a man who treated Nami, his friend, like a possession really pissed him off more. The octopus man jumped away from Zoro for a moment, and trumpeted loudly as a familiar face came into view. Oh, so it's just you, Luffy said as Sanji stopped, and even looked at the cow with a rather bored expression. Kill them, the cow was ordered, but the moment it set its eyes on both Luffy and Sanji, it tried to turn tail to escape. Oh, running away are you? Arlong asked in a cold voice as the cow froze. What, it's not like that thing can beat me or anything, Luffy said, crossing his arms as Arlong growled at Luffy. Kill them, Momoa, the octopus guy shouted as it roared at Luffy and the others before diving at them. Luffy started to push and knock a bunch of the weaker fishmen out of his way as Sanji ran quickly past his own opponent, nodding at Luffy, letting him know he's helped with the dismissal of this overgrown meal. Gomu Gomu no, Luffy began as he stopped, and grabbed the Seeking by its horns, and winding himself up. Don't get yourself stuck, shithead, Sanji yelled as Luffy held it down, then began to unwind himself, flinging it into the air, knocking fishmen out of the way while he did it. Sanji jumped onto the Seeking once it was in the air, and began to give it some of his kicks before knocking it back into the water unconscious. I didn't come here to fight any of your stupid friends. The one I want to fight is you, Luffy shouted at Arlong, who was looking downright pissed at this point. That sounds perfect, because I was thinking about how much I would really like to kill you, Arlong said to Luffy, standing back up. He's mine to fight, can you guys take care of the rest? Luffy asked his crew, who nodded or in Zoro's case smirked. I thought you'd never ask, Zoro said as the octopus guy pulled out his swords, glaring hard at Zoro as he tied his bandana around his head, preparing for a good fight. Sanji took his own opponent, angry with the words he was saying about Nami. Nami ignored the man's words, her attention focused on the one man who was looking at Usopp. You ran fast before, but can you do it again, Chu? He asked as Usopp did feel the need to run. I Usopp began as Nami moved in beside him. It's a bit cluttered here, Usopp. Let's take this elsewhere. She grabbed his arm and pulled him out of Arlong Park with the fishman hot on their heels, but Nami had a plan of her own. What are you people doing here? The fishman asked, stopping to look at the villagers who flinched back away from him. Everyone, Nami said, stopping her friend's worry on her face. Fire bird star. Usopp shouted, sending a flaming star at the man, causing him to look back at Usopp and Nami in anger. When I catch you both, I'm going to kill you, he shouted, and began to chase them once more. I really hate people like you, Luffy said, looking at Arlong, who began to laugh. And why should I care what type of people you hate? He asked Luffy as the boy threw a punch at the fishman, only for Arlong to catch it, pulling Luffy towards him and biting his wrist. I hate people like you, Arlong whispered to him before picking him up, looking towards the water. Last time I checked, fruit users can't swim, he said loudly as Luffy began to try and wiggle out of Arlong's grasp. Put me down, you bastard, Luffy shouted, alerting Zoro that Luffy needed him. The swordsman turned to run around the octopus guy, but was blocked off by him instead. Move out of my way, Zoro growled, only for the fishman to block him more. Useless as always, Sanji shouted at Zoro, who growled back at his rival. Sanji kicking the fishman, fighting him. Dazing him slightly, Sanji moved swiftly and kicked Arlong in the shoulder, moving his way down the man's arm, causing him to lose his grip on Luffy, setting him free. Why you? Arlong said, looking at Sanji while Luffy regained his footing. Thanks, Sanji. He was grateful for his friends. I sure picked one hell of a guy to follow, Sanji said, taking a puff of his smoke and looking back at the other man he was supposed to fight. Now where were we? Sanji asked the man, who glared but didn't say anything in return. Nami and Usopp ran until they reached a field of rice plantation. So you have a plan, Nami? Usopp asked her, taking deep breaths and walking backwards, staring at the puckered-lipped fishman, who was looking more and more pissed by the second. Yeah, we fight, she said to him, causing Usopp to growl at her. You're not Luffy. He then stared at the hat sitting on her head, though wondering if it caused its wearers to become simple-minded. Obviously I'm not. I just know that if we don't fight, we're never going to win, she shouted at Usopp, who got his slingshot ready. Nami, how could you betray us like this, after all we've been through, Chew? The fishman said, but Nami made a disgusted face. Betray? How could I betray someone who I never considered my nakama? She asked him, pointing her staff towards him as he growled at her, glaring hatefully. You tell him, Nami. Usopp cheered as the fishman began to charge at her, but Usopp shot his slingshot at him, causing him to fall back a few steps. I've got your back, Nami. It was his job after all to watch the backs of the people he called his friends. Right, I'll be counting on you, she said, grateful to be fighting with him for her freedom. Now this is for all those years. Sanji was feeling proud at the kick he had gotten in on the Arlong man. How he wished though that he could have kicked him more for making the beautiful Nami cry, but at least one hit was a bit satisfying. Sanji was daydreaming and overthinking as his opponent hit him hard, throwing him into the water, surprising him. Luffy calling out to him was all he heard as the water surrounded him. Now that man will be shown the great difference between fishmen and humans by one of my brothers, Arlong said as Luffy glared at him hard. I'm really confused, Luffy said simply, which caused Arlong to laugh some more. Such a typical stupid human. Of course you're confused. We fishmen are far greater than you weak humans, he said, but Luffy shook his head. I'm confused that someone so ugly could come from an island so beautiful. Arlong stopped laughing now as Luffy looked at him. A human like you has been to my home? He shouted, but Luffy didn't laugh or smile. My brother Namur was born on Fishman Island, and let me tell you, he's so much cooler than you'll ever be, Luffy said to the fishman, pissing him off. Namur, I've never heard of him, Arlong said, not really thinking that hard about it, but Luffy smirked. And he's probably never heard of you. I mean, you may have been from paradise, but your time here in the East has dulled your reputation, Luffy taunted. Arlong gritted his teeth in anger. Luffy, are you just going to stand around all day and talk, or actually kick some ass? Zoro shouted at Luffy, who laughed back at his first mate. Sorry, I'll get on that now, Luffy said before pulling his arm back and punching Arlong in the chest, but before he could give the fishman a chance to recover, Luffy had begun his Gatling gun attack, knocking him through a wall. Luffy waited for a second and frowned. Don't tell me that was all it took. He was worried that that clown guy Buffy, oh whatever his name was, could be stronger than this guy. Don't make me laugh, was that all you've got, human? Arlong pushed the rubble off of himself and looked at Luffy, who began to crack his knuckles, happy that he still had a chance to fight. Nope, that was just a warm-up, Luffy said blankly, ready to keep going. I see. Nami hit the fishman with her staff as hard as she could be. She wasn't stupid enough to think that might actually beat him. Usopp, a little more help would be great, she shouted at him, because even though he was brave, he wasn't that brave. Actually, Nami, I'm thinking I'm coming down with the runaway and never look back disease. It's highly contagious, so I'm going to hide over here for a while if that's okay with you, Usopp said, suddenly running behind a tree, but had his slingshot ready just in case. And here I thought you were a brave warrior, she scoffed, hitting the fishman again. I am a warrior. I just prefer to fight from over here, he yelled at her as the fishman just stared at Nami and Usopp. What weaklings, the fishman said, deciding that he didn't even need to fight them when his brothers were fighting people like Roronoa Zoro. How will you ever be able to stand by Luffy's side as one of his crewmates if all you do is hide? Nami snapped at Usopp, catching the boy's attention finally. Nami, but she had turned her back and pointed her staff at Usopp, her eyes firm. If we can't even beat one enemy, then we aren't worthy to be a part of his crew, Nami said to him. And Usopp looked down, not being able to meet her eyes. Then it looks like if I'm going to be on this crew, I have to get a lot stronger. Luffy, when we're 17 we'll have to be strong enough for anything, Usopp said, and Luffy grinned. Right, we'll take the Grand Line by storm, Luffy said, giving his hand out to Usopp, who grabbed hold of it tightly. And we'll make the world remember our names. Wait, you stupid fish, Usopp suddenly yelled, stepping away from the trees, making Nami smile, because Usopp was coming back to the semi-brave man she had met with Luffy. Pulling out a special piece of ammunition, Usopp loaded it into his slingshot and fired it as the man turned onto Nami in anger. Sake Star, Usopp shouted, letting it fly, hitting the fishman head-on, coating him in the alcohol. Sake? He asked, and even Nami was confused. Last one I've got, Firebird Star, he shouted, sending the flaming bullet at the man, which once the star hit the sake it burst into a big fire. Nami now, he shouted as the fishman was distracted. She turned quickly and whacked the fishman in the head, causing him to fall to the ground and not move. We did it, Usopp shouted, and even Nami was happy. Now let's get back to Luffy, Nami said in happiness as Usopp puffed up his chest in pride. I didn't even need you at all, he said to her, beginning to walk away, but he heard a groan, causing both of them to freeze as Usopp grabbed the wooden rod from Nami's hands and continuously smacked the man until he was down for sure. Don't you think that was a bit much? She asked him, looking at her now broken rod. I may have panicked a bit, but never fear, I'm not so much of a coward that I would kill a man, Usopp said as Nami shook her head at him. You were very brave, she rubbed the back of his head. If I want to stand beside Luffy, I guess I have no other choice but to be, Usopp said, looking down the trail that would lead them back to where Luffy was fighting. Don't forget though that it's okay to be scared sometimes, she said, but laughed when she realized Usopp's knees were shaking at the thought of having to now join in and help the monsters of his crew. Yeah, scared sometimes, I don't know what you're talking about, Nami, Usopp said as she shook her head. Come on, let's go see if we can help any at all. Zoro and the octopus guy stared at one another, wondering who should be the first to move. The octopus guy, who turned out to be called Hachi, was a user of 8 swords, but for Zoro it didn't matter, he would defeat this fish man no matter what. I don't care what you can do, not even death can take me until I'm strong enough to beat that man. The hawk passed through Zoro's mind. The octopus guy came at Zoro with his swords ready and swinging, as Zoro closed his eyes, letting his body relax and his observation reach out. Bending his body, Zoro was able to miss the swinging blades as well as stop the fishman from moving any further. I've trained hard to match up to not only my captain, but to the man I want to beat. Someone like you can never stand in our way, Zoro growled, bringing his blades up and around, calling out his attack, slicing Hachi down the middle. How dare you, I'm really going to kill you now, I've got 8 swords, and you've only got 1, Hachi yelled at Zoro, who didn't even turn around as he caught the fishman's attention. You've made a major mistake on judgment, because not even a single one of your blade can ever be as heavy as mine, Zoro said to him, finally turning around, his bandana covering his eyes, blackening the silver. Catching the blades with his own three, Zoro glared up at the fishman, the silver in his eyes reflecting off of his swords. "Do you understand now? My swords will always be so much stronger," Zoro said, breaking all 8 of the swords as the fishman yelled out, dropping the dead broken blades, and began to try and punch Zoro instead. "Only a fool would give a swordsman his arms," Zoro said before using another attack, this time finishing up the fishman. "Sorry, but you mean nothing to me," Zoro said as Arlong watched one of his brothers fall, anger and shock in his face. Zoro put his katana away carefully and slowly to show the full impact of his skills. "Now that's how you fillet a fish," Zoro whispered to himself, looking at the water where that stupid cook was splashing around. Sanji realized that being in the water probably wasn't a good idea. 1, because he couldn't kick as well through the water, but also because this man was a lot faster than him and could breathe apparently. The fishman seemed to realize that Sanji was weak in the water and took full advantage of this, which made things harder for Sanji. Even though his kicks were so much stronger than normal people's kicks, they didn't mean shit if he couldn't land one on this piece of shitty fish. Having trouble breathing, he asked Sanji, who had been beaten around by the fishman, who was smiling at the pain Sanji was in. Sanji took another hit, but instead of facing yet another defeat, he tried to run up the wall to escape the water and get some air in his burning lungs. Of course, this was seen quite clearly by the fishman, who cornered the panicking Sanji. "I don't know why you're fighting so hard. Is it for Nami? That traitor deserves the death Arlong will give her. Is it for your friends? Humans are the weakest of them all. Your rubber friend is no different, and Arlong will kill him soon as well." The fishman smirked at Sanji once more before adding the words strong enough to piss the blonde chef off completely. "You can't protect anyone." Sanji's eyes widened in anger at those words. He had left his restaurant home to sail with his rubber brain captain, who was now fighting for the freedom of the beautiful Nami. Luffy only needs the best beside him, the strongest and most reliable to be in his crew. If he couldn't protect anyone, then what good was he? Something was beginning to happen in Sanji's mind. Even though he was underwater, his eyes were focusing more clearly, and even the sound of the ripples against their skin were beginning to sound loud. "What the?" he thought to himself as the fishman began to laugh. Some more bubbles burst from some marks in his neck, sounding way too loud for their small size. Suddenly Sanji had an idea as he kicked the fishman in the chest, pushing himself away slightly before biting down on the fishman's neck and jumping out of the water as fast as he could. "I can breathe again," Sanji gasped as Luffy and Zoro looked his way in unmentioned ever concern. "Sanji. Nay, you look like Sabo when your hair's wet," Luffy said in thought, avoiding another of Arlong's attacks, causing the fishman to growl at him for looking away during a fight. "Shut up, you shithead. I expected you to have kicked his ass by now," Sanji yelled at Luffy, who laughed, jumping away from Arlong, who attempted to bite the bouncing teenager. She, I'm working on it," he giggled as Sanji growled, pointing his finger at the water where the fishman he was fighting was beginning to pull himself out. "Get your shitty ass out of the water, and let me show you just how good I really am," Sanji yelled, then removed his jacket because it was water-filled and rather heavy now. "You're slow swirls. I thought you were going to beat him, not strip for him," Zoro joked, crossing his arms and looking rather unimpressed towards Sanji, who was just about to blow. He was so mad. "I'm going to kill you now, Blondie. Now that you're out here, I'm going to use fishman karate to finish you off for good," the fishman said carefully to Sanji once he was out of the water and standing before Sanji, who was looking beyond pissed off. "Fishman karate?" Luffy asked, but Namor's style of fighting came to mind, so he smiled, knowing it would be good for Sanji to learn to fight against it. While the fishman was talking, Sanji's anger was reaching its boiling point, not only with that stupid ball of moss mocking him, but Luffy just dancing around the main dish's attack. He had just about enough of everything. Sanji jumped in even before the fishman had finished what he was saying, and gave him a great kick to the head, knocking the man backwards. Even before he hit the ground or regained his footing, Sanji continued his kicks mercilessly, letting his frustration out. The fishman caught his balance and began to punch at Sanji, but it was blocked by Sanji's kicks before Sanji kicked the man in the face, then his back, forcing him to the ground. "You bastard!" the fishman yelled at Sanji, who then began to backflip, his foot hitting the man under the chin, then into the wall before standing straight and glaring at the now unconscious fishman. It's rather rude for a fish to be talking back to a chef, don't you think? Sanji asked before pulling out a cigarette and lighting it. Happy, Moss Head? Sanji asked Zoro, who looked away, refusing to answer that. Arlong looked around at his fallen friends in anger before Nami and Usopp appeared where the fallen wall had been. Nami caught his eyes as he turned away from Luffy and looked at her carefully. Oh, Nami, perfect timing. I've decided that to ensure you remain my cartographer forever, to just kill everyone instead, and keep you alive. After all, you've really helped me out, you know, he said as Nami's eyes widened at him. Luffy was standing behind him, his eyes shadowed and angry. Thanks for not screaming, little Luffy. You really helped me out. Zehahahahahahah. Luffy was not having a good day remembering that man again, and seeing this guy, and how he treated Nami made him sick. The look on both Nami and Luffy's face bothered Usopp, who brought his slingshot back, and shot a rotten egg towards Arlong. Usopp! Luffy shouted, surprised to actually see him, but really should he be? That's right, I helped take down one of that G. Nami helped a bit, but I did most the work. He shouted in pride as Luffy laughed, turning his eyes back to a shocked and angry Arlong. You're like him, trying to steal someone's freedom. I hate people like you, Luffy said to Arlong, who wasn't even listening to him. How dare you? How dare you people attack my family, my brothers? He shouted at Luffy, who glared hard at him. You attacked one of my family first. Luffy then dodged a few of Arlong's attacks, avoiding being hit, and even bitten. Geez, that was too close, Luffy said as he had moved his neck out of the way of Arlong's sharp teeth. A part of the building had come down. This is the power of the fishmen. We are on a whole other level than you humans, he shouted as Luffy fisted his hand and punched a wall beside him, causing it to fall around him just like the other. I can make walls crumble just as easy as you can. Don't think you're special because of that. I know plenty of amazing fishmen who are 10,000 stronger than you, and a lot nicer as well, Luffy said as Arlong growled. Human sympathizers are nothing but weaklings, Arlong growled and attacked, but Luffy dodged yet again. Jinbei can never be called weak, Luffy yelled at him, causing him to freeze to a name he had known of so well. Jinbei? What does he have to do with someone like you? Arlong asked, eyeing the kid now who was just staring at him. Jinbei is one of my nakama, or at least he will be. He's like one of my brothers, Luffy said, happily excited to see his friend again, and this time he would ensure that he join his crew. Jinbei must be slipping if he wants to be on a crew with humans, Arlong growled, but Luffy didn't acknowledge the words as he brought his fist flying towards Arlong, knocking him back a few steps. Jinbei doesn't even matter. What's really important is the fact that you humans are weak and pathetic. What can you even really do, huh? Arlong asked Luffy in anger, aiming his attacks at him. But Luffy was able to jump back a lot, avoiding him. You're right, I can't do that much, Luffy said, stopping now, looking Arlong in the eyes as his family filled his memory. I can't use swords properly, so I have Zoro by my side. Luffy started Vista, filling his memory, smiling. I can't cook, so I need Sanji to help make sure my crew doesn't starve. Thatch grinned, this time replacing Vista in his mind. I can't shoot well, and even my lies suck, so I need Usopp to watch my back. Aizu came into the picture, this time giving a gentle smile. And I can't even sail these seas without Nami to lead my way, Haruto winked this time. You really are a useless human, depending on everyone like that. What can you do then, rubber boy? Arlong shouted, this time catching Luffy biting down on his shoulder, blood dripping down his arm now as Luffy grabbed him by the face and began to push him off. I can kick your ass and protect my family, this time Pops, and Marco filled his mind, giving him the strength to push Arlong off for sure. Giving him a glare before Luffy coated his hand in armament hockey, punching him in the face, sending him flying backwards. I shattered your teeth, shark guy, Luffy said, happy to have done that. But then his eyes took on a curious glint as Arlong removed his teeth, showing that they could just regrow in again. That's so weird, but so cool, Luffy said, thinking of an idea, his smile forming on his face. I'm going to show you how much more superior fishmen are to humans, Arlong shouted, using his teeth to snap at Luffy, who dodged with ease, but he was so focused on the teeth and how hard it would be to grab one of them that he got caught, his side bleeding deeply now. Damn it. Luffy grabbed the injury, staining his hands red with his own blood. Shahaha. Arlong laughed as Luffy pulled the pair of teeth from his side, looking them over before smiling, ignoring the pain. "What are you doing?" Arlong asked in surprise and anger as Luffy put the shark teeth in his own mouth and clamped down. "See, now I'm just like you, but not as stupid," Luffy said through the teeth, but everyone around him sweat dropped at those words. Luffy then tried to do what Arlong had done and bite down on the shark, but was swatted aside easily by the large man. I guess that didn't work after all," Luffy said, sitting down looking annoyed that his shark teeth broke. "Where'd he go now?" Luffy looked around as Usopp and Nami yelled at him that Arlong had gone into the water. The water? Luffy looked at the still water, but his senses could tell him Arlong was about to attack. "So you won't do it that way, huh?" Luffy smirked, waiting now for Arlong to re-show himself as the boy knew he would. "Shark on darts," Arlong shouted, sending himself flying into the second story of Arlong Park. Luffy had stepped out of the way avoiding the attack, but looked up at Arlong, who was smirking. "I'm surprised that you were able to dodge that attack," he said, but Luffy didn't reply to him, but Arlong began his shark attack once more, pushing Luffy into the air to dodge it. Once Luffy was in the air, he began his Gatling gun to hit Arlong, but because of his speed and the fact he was not on the ground, Luffy missed. Arlong shot at Luffy in the air, hitting him, because he couldn't move properly, sending him flying, which greatly annoyed him. Grabbing Arlong, Luffy threw him to the ground before stomping on him using a bit of armament on the bottom of his feet to push him deeper into the cement. But Arlong wasn't done just yet. "You don't know how to just stay down," Luffy whined as Arlong reached his hand into a wall and pulled out a long-edged sword and began to try and hit Luffy with it. "Swords hurt, so I won't be hit." And he meant that. Luffy had learned to dodge blades his entire life. This one was big, so it was slower and easier to move away from. "Humans drove the man I respected to his death. Jinbei is a traitor to our powerful race for joining up with the like of you stupid humans who killed that man," Arlong shouted at Luffy. But the boy was dodging the swords, so he didn't really pay attention much, and really he didn't care. Luffy got to a window and threw himself inside to catch his breath. Jumping up walls was harder than it looked. Luffy looked around the room in confusion, not sure what he was supposed to make of this place. Relaxing slightly since he knew he would be back on his feet shortly, Luffy took in everything from the many old maps to the desk hidden in the corner. "What's with this room?" Luffy looked around, but something felt off about the place. It felt cold and lonely. "This is the place where I make that woman draw her maps. You can search the world, but you'll find no one else who can draw maps like her." "Really?" Luffy said in a bored tone, because he didn't care that Nami could do perfect maps. As long as she was his friend, she could do whatever she wanted. During Arlong's little speech, a pen had fallen to the ground and rolled towards Luffy, who stared at it, his eyes overshadowed, hiding his expression from Arlong. "There'd be nothing more foolish than letting her go free," Arlong said happily as Luffy looked over the pen carefully. "This pen, it's got her blood soaked into it," he said carefully. "For Nami, this place is where she can be the happiest. She will work for me to help achieve my ambitions. She will help me chart the whole of the East Blue, and then we shall rule this world." He laughed, bringing his sword up and placing it at Luffy's throat, but the boy didn't move at all. Arlong wanted to keep laughing, but even he froze for a moment, feeling the atmosphere change in the room. Something about that boy was starting to put him off. Maybe it was the way he was so calm right now. Luffy continued to twirl the pen in his hand, thinking about it and the pain that had been caused from it. "Before I came here, I had a really bad memory of a man who tried to steal the life of one of my brothers. I wondered why I thought about him right then. Why now after all these years? But now I know," Luffy said, then put the pen down. "I care about your nightmares? I won't kill Nami unless she tries to run away. As of now, Nami is my nakama. No one can use her like I can. She'd be a waste to be given to a weak human like you," he said as Luffy looked up, anger in his eyes in a way none had ever seen before. Grabbing the blade in Arlong's hand, the fishman was surprised to find he could no longer move it as Luffy glared deeply at him, hate radiating off of his very being. "You're just like him. You'll use anyone to get what you want, even killing your friends for it. Nami deserves to be free from you. I couldn't stop that man as a child, but I swear I will stop you. You stop me. You humans are all the same. The only difference Nami has is that's been able to raise above your pathetic weaknesses by proving she is useful to us fishmen," Arlong shouted. But Luffy wasn't playing anymore as he broke the blade with his bare hands. Arlong flinched back at the look from the boy, and the strength shone. Luffy wasn't listening as Arlong began to explain his plans for Nami as he then stood up, his face going blank but the feeling of anger still surrounding him, making Luffy very unpredictable. Looking at the desk in the corner, Luffy kicked it as hard as he could out through the wall, sending it flying. "What?" Arlong asked, confused like everyone else below, but Luffy didn't stop there. Looking at the bookshelf, Luffy then punched it through the other wall, sending it and all that was on it flying. Then he turned back and kicked the door, breaking it and the wall around it, making Arlong very angry. "What are you doing, you rubber brat?" he asked, swinging his blade down only for Luffy to dodge it, making Arlong cut through a large stack of maps. Taking it as a hint, Luffy punched a bunch more maps through the wall, sending them floating down to the ground, where everyone was confused on what Luffy was doing, but Nami was crying. "My maps? Do you know how many years that girl spent working on those?" Arlong asked before aiming an attack at Luffy, who dodged yet again, punching more stuff out of the room. Arlong had enough, finally being able to grab Luffy, pinning him to the wall. But Luffy refused to let up, kicking his foot through another stack, sending them flying through a new hole. "You've gone way too far, human," Arlong said, biting down on Luffy's neck, blood dripping from the deep injury as Luffy winced, but pushed against Arlong's face to get him off. "I really don't give two shits how great you and the other fishmen are. I like them, but right now these maps, this place, I don't care about it. I just know now there's only one thing left for me to do to help her," Luffy said before breaking Arlong's nose, causing the man to jump back in pain, holding the injury. "This room can't be here anymore." Luffy's eyes had taken on a wild look to them. "I'll destroy every place she doesn't want to be trapped in," Luffy yelled before shooting his foot up through the roof as Arlong realigned his nose and stood back up, glaring with as much hate at Luffy as possible. Arlong moved into another attack to finish this off, and while Luffy's leg had been through the roof, Arlong was able to bite down on the boy. Ignoring the pain, Luffy brought his foot down fast and hard, hitting Arlong in the back. A crack had been heard, but Luffy was not in the caring mood right now. Continuing to use the pressure of his foot and all of his strength, Luffy pushed Arlong down through each level of the place, bringing the entire Arlong Park down with him. Everyone was freaking out, because this was the hardest they had ever seen Luffy fight, also because not a single movement had been made after the dust had cleared around the place. "Luffy." Nami whispered, her hand over her mouth in worry. No one else moved, but just waited to see who had won. Finally, rocks being pushed aside caught everyone's attention as Luffy stood up, bloody and panting. "Luffy!" A few people called out. Zoro's eyes took in the damage done to Luffy and frowned, since it was his job to ensure Luffy didn't get hurt like this. "Nami!" he shouted, catching the attention of the girl, who looked at him as he took another deep breath. "You are one of us," he shouted as the tears spilled over her eyes, falling down her cheeks. "MN," was all she could say as another wave of pure happiness went through her, bringing fresh tears. Everyone around them broke out into cheers of happiness, because now they were finally free. Zoro, standing up, climbed the rubble and helped support Luffy down carefully. "I'm alright," Luffy said to his first mate, who was eyeing him. "Of course you are," was all Zoro needed to say, but even he smirked with Luffy as they got to flat ground, letting Luffy stand on his own. "Hold on a moment." Some guy wearing a mouse's hat and a marine outfit shouted. Luffy stopped and looked at him and his surrounding marines, who wore stupid smiles. "The one who will take the honor of stopping these fishmen will be me." He didn't even get to finish his sentence before Luffy punched him in the face, and Zoro, using his sheathed blade, smacked him in the head. "And stay down," Zoro said, then walked away with Luffy, leaving the marine down in the dirt, then looked at the other marines, giving them his demon glare as Luffy had finished dealing with them as well. "Don't make us all angry again when things are finally looking up," Zoro growled, and Luffy laughed, glad to see his best friend relaxing a bit. Zoro worried about him too much. Nami watched Luffy's back and smiled before taking the hat off of her head and placing it on top of Luffy's. He realized his hat was back and in perfect condition like he asked. "Thanks, Luffy," she whispered before he turned around, facing her, fully a smile on his face. Welcome home, Nami. And that she was home, where she had people that cared about her so much they would beat down her demons when she couldn't. "I'm home, later on somewhere on the Grand Line." So Arlong failed after all, a voice said as a shadow covered his whole body, blocking him from view. "And after we gave him all he'd need to take over the East Blue, what a shame," it continued, but a smile was on the man's face as if expecting Arlong to fail. Apparently he was defeated by a boy wearing a straw hat and his small crew. Someone said over the transponder, snail catching the man's interest. Does this boy have a name? He asked as the snail went silent for a moment, the person on the other side flipping through something. Yes, Monkey D. Luffy, apparently his bounty was just released. I can send it to you if you wish. That would be nice, he said, hanging up the phone, and coming out of the shadows, his dirty smile stretching across his face. So little Luffy's left home. Zihaha, I'll have to greet him properly now, won't I? Zihahahaha. Luffy sat on a cliffside looking down at the water, a small smile on his face as he took in the wind off the sea. I expected to find you where the party is at, not over here. Nami had come up beside him, and sat down on the ledge as well. Yeah, I'll go back in a moment, just relaxing a bit. Luffy said, looking at her, and smiling as well. We'll be leaving tomorrow, right? She asked him, her eyes turned towards the sea. He nodded. I've got what I came to the East Blue for, so we should probably make our way back to paradise. He had his nakama now, so there wasn't any real reason to stay here any longer than needed. Is the Grand Line, or rather paradise, that bad? She asked him, trying to hide the anxiety in her voice. But Luffy gave his small laugh. It can be, but I have faith in my crew. He smiled at her again as she relaxed, because her captain was the strongest she had ever met, stronger than Arlong. I'll be counting on you, Captain, she said, standing up, but Luffy pointed to something behind him, his head tilted in confusion. Whose grave is that? He asked as Nami placed her hand on the wooden cross, staring down at it. It's my mother's, was all she said. He nodded once more. You've made her proud, Luffy replied quietly as she walked away, a small smile on her own face now, because she so hoped those words were true. She hoped that after all these years she had made Belmere proud of her. Ma, Pops, we're coming your way soon. He smiled before jumping up, and following the delicious scent of meat back to the village party. Usopp was singing his praise on top of a bunch of wood, and Zoro was drinking his weight in booze. Sanji was helping with the meals as Luffy jumped in, and grabbed a few stacks of meat, and shoving a few in his pockets just in case. Boy, you did a good thing. A man wearing a pinwheel had come up beside Luffy as he was stuffing a bunch of meat in his face. I did? He asked through a full mouth, spitting food everywhere. Yes, you set us free. He looked at the party in front of him as Luffy swallowed. I don't care about that. I just wanted to free Nami. Luffy admitted, causing the man to chuckle, then turned to him. Nami will be going with you, correct? He asked, and Luffy nodded, since there was no way he was leaving without her now. Then let me make this clear to you, boy, if you do anything to take away that smile of hers, I'll come kill you myself. Got it? He shouted at Luffy, who knew the protective nature of a parent figure, so he nodded his head, and smiled. Got it, but I don't really plan on taking anything from her, he said, but the man was already leaving to give his respects to a grave on a cliff. What's with this place? Luffy said before going back in for more meat, forgetting anything else, but the rumbling of his stomach once more. When morning came, Luffy and the others were on the Mary as it began to pull away from shore. Shouldn't we wait for her? Zoro asked. Since they came all this way, he didn't think Luffy would leave without his navigator. Nah, she'll be here in a moment. Luffy knew Nami needed to say goodbye in her own way, much like he had to his own family. Nami saw the piles of people waiting at the shore, so taking a deep breath she ran through them, causing them to scream out at her, begging her to wait a moment so they could say goodbye properly. Once she had finished, she jumped to the railing of Luffy's ship, and smirked at everyone before dropping the wallets on the deck, and winking back. You damn brat! Some yelled, but then wished her well as she joined the others who were shaking their heads. Don't forget, boy! The man on the shore yelled as Luffy waved in response, because he wouldn't. Luffy would never do anything to hurt Nami, or his family ever. So do we go straight for the entrance to the Grand Line right away? Usopp asked Luffy, who shook his head. We have one more stop to make, Luffy said as he walked into the men's quarters, and grabbed an envelope, bringing it out to everyone. My ma said to give this to you guys before we came to home waters, he said, not bothering to read it earlier. A letter from one of the Whitebeard pirates. Usopp said, carefully looking at the letter. Not just any pirate either, but Marco the Phoenix himself. Zoro smiled, but it was Nami who snatched the letter from Luffy's hand, opening it up. If you're Luffy reading this, please don't throw it away. It is important information for your crew, so put it back until you're ready to go to the Grand Line again. Nami started looking at Luffy, who began to pout at Marco's lack of faith in him. "If you're not Luffy, then we're all happy to have you around. He's hard to handle, but has a good heart, so take care of him for us. We know he was raised here in paradise, but you were probably not, therefore we wish for you to have a good start. Before you go any further, please stop at the last island before the entrance to Reverse Mountain. There you will find anything you need to survive. For his navigator, we suggest you find a log pose. Your compass won't work on this sea, and entering without one may look childish. We've provided a picture to ensure you pick up the right one. If any of you know hockey, or are starting it, please continue. Luffy is expected to teach you as much as possible, so don't let him off that easy." To the chef, "Luffy eats more than a normal human being should. Please ensure he doesn't starve or overeat. All of us are now counting on you all to take care of our Luffy. Good luck, Marco, 1st Division Commander." Nami Readout then began to look for the picture she would need. "He sounded so stiff," Usopp said, looking at Luffy, who was making a weird face. "It sounds like one of his reports. He probably wrote that while doing paperwork." Luffy knew Marco went into autopilot during his office duty, so it was kind of expected that his note sounded like that. "He cares enough to write it, that's all that matters," Nami said, then looked at them all. "I guess we should set the sails towards Luge Town then," she said, and Luffy nodded. His navigator knew the way, so he would follow her. "Let's go, everyone," he cheered as a seagull flew above him, dropping a newspaper on the deck, surprising Luffy. But Nami was the one who picked it up and gasped in surprise. "Luffy, this is X." When Thatch woke up, he began his morning rituals to prepare for the day ahead. He would start heating the ovens, and setting the different chefs to where they needed to be. Thatch enjoyed giving some of his division a day off of cooking, so he made sure to have a schedule set to help him know who likes cooking breakfast, and who enjoys dinner. Once he got the people up who were supposed to help him that morning, he would then hunt down the newspaper, because the Intel division would have his head if they didn't know what was happening around the world. "I wonder what's happening today," he said, picking up the paper. The seagull must have come earlier today, since a few papers were on the deck waiting to be picked up. Grabbing a few of them in his arms, a piece of paper floated to the ground, making him turn back and stare at it. "What's this?" he asked, putting the papers down and picking up the new one. The moment his eyes reached the picture of a smiling boy wearing a straw hat, Thatch's smile went from shock to pure excitement as his eyes drifted down to the bounty at the bottom. "Oh, your ma isn't going to like this, kid." Thatch laughed, then decided to quickly bring the papers to the galley before going to wake his Phoenix friend. "It's what, 6 a.m. Thatch Yoy?" Marco asked, opening his door and glaring at the redhead that then put the bounty poster in Marco's face, causing the blonde's lazy eyes to widen. "No way," he said, taking the poster, and Thatch nodded in excitement. "I'm going to wake up our wonderful Fire Fist and show him the news. Want to come with me?" Thatch asked Marco, who had yet to even really throw clothes on, still in his pajama bottoms and shirtless. "Give me a moment, Yoy." Marco slammed the door closed and through, but not before pinning the poster to his wall where Luffy's smile could shine for him day and night. "You have more of those, right, Thatch Yoy?" Marco asked once he had opened his door, causing the man to laugh in response. "I knew you'd probably steal that one, so yeah, I grabbed some from the other newspapers," Thatch said, pulling a few rolled up ones out of a pocket in his pants. "Good, we need to let the crew know that Luffy's finally become a known pirate, Yoy," Marco said, following beside him towards the 2nd Division. "A known pirate with quite the starting bounty," Thatch said with a smile, knocking on Ace's door, waking the brunette up. "Breakfast is in an hour, go away," Ace said, because as much as he loved to eat, he loved his sleep just as much. "This might wake you up," Thatch said, doing what he did to Marco, and putting Luffy's bounty poster in his face. "That's," he said, taking it as his smile grew across his face. "We need to let everyone know." Ace jumped around in excitement, because Luffy was finally being put on the map. "Might want to throw some pants on, Brad. As much as we love to see you shirtless, I don't think the nurses can handle seeing you in your boxers." Thatch laughed, making Ace laugh with him. "Might be worth the test, right?" A spark started burning in his dark coal eyes. "I'm going to wake the old man and show him the news, Yoy." Marco left Ace and Thatch to pass on the poster and news to everyone else while making his way to the old man's room. Marco knocked at his father's door and waited for him to be called in to where Pops was awake, but not out of bed. "What's happened, Marco?" he asked as Marco smiled. "News on Luffy, Yoy." he said, passing the bounty poster towards the old man, who looked it over and smiled. "It's rare for a bounty like this in the East Blue," Pop said, but smiled down at the laughing boy in the picture. 45 million, that's higher than Ace's starting bounty, was Yui. Marco knew Ace was now going to work hard to always stay one step ahead of Luffy to help give the boy something to catch up to. It says in the paper apparently he took out almost every strong pirate in the East Blue, and knowing him, that was only the start of the many who will fall trying to stop him. Yui. East Blue was weak compared to other seas, so it was no surprise that Luffy was able to take them out, but Marco knew that once he hit paradise again, people weren't going to be that kind. "So he'll be back in home waters soon," Pop said before laughing. "Shortly now by the looks of it, Yui." Marco couldn't wait to have Luffy back in home waters where he could watch over him. "When he comes our way we shall greet him, but not until then, Marco," Pop said, knowing the protectiveness his eldest son hadn't decreased at all since Luffy had left. "I know, but now I can at least keep an eye on him, Yui." Also, the papers will start to send news of his adventure towards them, which made Marco smile. "We had him for 17 years, and now he's all grown up with a large bounty." Marco took it all in because it meant that everyone would be after Luffy's head. "Should he ever call for us, we will come to him. He's not alone, Marco." Pops reassured his son, because it was the truth. If Luffy ever called their names, they'd be there as soon as they could. Marco stood up, leaving the poster with the old man. "It seems our family has discovered the news, and as their older brother I have to go ensure the party doesn't get too out of hand, Yui." Pops laughed, letting Marco leave, closing the door behind him. "The new era of pirates is beginning. What changes will you bring with you, my son?" Sabo was working with his new team, consisting of a red-headed girl and a fish man who Jinbei had introduced him to. "Sabo, we need to move now," the girl koala said to him, puffing her cheeks at him, showing her annoyance. "What, we finished the job easy enough, can't I enjoy my meal in peace?" he asked her, since he didn't see any real reason to leave all this food behind him to waste. "But Hack is waiting for us at the ship already," she said to him, but his stubbornness was on par with Ace and Luffy's. Yeah, I'll be there soon, I promise," he said as she stomped off to let the fish man known as Hack know that Sabo was taking his time leaving the restaurant again. "Wow, this new rookie's really rising," someone said behind Sabo, looking at a newspaper. "No big deal, the kid took out the East Blue pirates. He'll probably get crushed once he hits the Grand Line," another said to the man as Sabo was listening in. "Monkey D. Luffy, huh? Maybe just in case we should remember his name." With those words, Sabo had turned himself around in his chair and snatched the paper out of the man's hand. "Luffy?" he said as the man scowled at him in confusion and anger. Sabo ignored the men and continued to read the news, taking in as much information about his little brother as possible. 45 million, huh? You sure need to come back to home waters with a bang, don't you, Lou? Sabo chuckled, stealing the poster. "Maybe I'll make a call to Ace and everyone, see if they know the news yet." Sabo threw the rest of the paper except the article and the bounty back at the men before walking out, his meal finished. Mihawk was sitting on his ship reading the paper, a smirk on his face at the bounty poster in front of him. "You've only been away from your family for a few months at best, and already have a bounty?" Mihawk asked out loud, but turned his sails towards an island where a drunk was probably relaxing. "His family probably already knows with how protective they are." Mihawk mused, imagining a great emperor's crew partying this very moment to welcome their little brother back into the pirating world. "It's Hawkeye, Mihawk," someone yelled from the shore as the warlord stepped on the sand, glaring at them with a lazy expression. "I'm looking for your captain," he said as a few people then began to lead him to their drunk red-haired captain. "It's too early for this," Shanks said, looking up at Mihawk with shadows covering his face. "Come to spar, Mihawk?" Shanks asked the man, who scowled. "I refuse to fight a disabled man," Mihawk said casually as Shanks laughed, knowing Mihawk was a little sore about him losing his arm, but since it was for Luffy he secretly forgave him for it. "What brings you all the way to my vacation island?" Shanks asked, because Mihawk rarely went out of his way for another. "I thought you might like to see this." Mihawk then put in front of him a poster of a laughing boy wearing a straw hat. "Luffy!" Shanks yelled, grabbing the poster and staring hard at it. Others had come to gather around, a smile on all of their faces at the sight of their littlest fan. "He's gotten so big," Shanks looked fondly at the boy, hearing his laughter in his mind. "He has, but his attitude hasn't changed much," Mihawk said, causing Shanks to look up at the swordsman. And you would know this how? Shanks asked. Because, I ran into him, and his small crew not that long ago. Mihawk said, but Shanks didn't look away. And his crew is still standing. Mihawk could destroy crews if he felt the urge some days. I rather enjoyed my time. His first mate is quite the swordsman. With a little more training he might become even better. Shanks's eyes widened, because that was a compliment coming from the greatest swordsman. Deciding not to spoil the mood, because even Ben was shocked by the compliment, Shanks raised his empty mug to his crew. I say we celebrate to welcome Luffy back home. A loud cry had been heard by almost everyone around him. It appears you've already done just that, Mihawk said, looking at the empty barrels around him. That was just the warm-up party, now we can move on to the actual one. Shanks laughed, passing Mihawk a drink which he reluctantly took. Drink up, my friend. This is for Luffy after all. Shanks said, his smile annoying Mihawk. But he drank anyway, mostly to shut the stupid drunk up. That's it, Shanks cheered, making Ben shake his head. Welcome back, Luffy. Garp was ooking at the poster with a small frown on his face. He always knew Luffy would follow this path. His heritage along with his background guaranteed he had no other choice. If only my stupid son had given you to me, things would have been different. He tried to reassure himself, but even he knew that Luffy would follow his own path no matter who raised him. Your damn pirate family will be celebrating, no doubt. He smiled, looking out the window, having already experienced this with Ace. When Ace got his first bounty, he had made his way to the old pirate's ship just to shout at him and greet him with the fist of love. Luffy had still been there at the time, greeting his grandpa with smiles and laughter, so he couldn't hit the other child. It seemed that the blonde had left to go his own way, and goodness only knew where he was right now. Sighing once more, Garp opened a secret space in his drawer where the transponder snail linking him to the Whitebeard pirates was, but also alongside it was Ace's many bounty posters and news clippings on the boy. Placing Luffy's bounty poster in the drawer, Garp would be keeping track of the kid's adventures alongside his other grandchild's. After all, what kind of grandpa would he be if he didn't scrapbook everything his grandchildren did? Closing the drawer again, Garp stood up from his desk and went to the window, opening it up. The new generation might be strong, but nothing will stop my fist of love, not even you, Luffy. Captain. A white bear called, carrying a newspaper in his hands, meaning the seagull that carried it had come early. What's wrong? He asked his crewmate, who pushed the paper into the pirate captain's hands, making said man look down at it. Luffy, yaw, Law said in surprise, but then gave a smile looking at the picture. It's that boy from all those years ago, Beppo said, alerting the other members of the Heart Pirates to come over and see what was going on. You're right, but I thought he was a white-beard pirate, Penguin asked, looking down at the poster as Law read the article, and smiled the entire time. He's keeping a promise, Law said, remembering how the boy said he'd set out at 17. The memory of spending time with the kid was quite a fond one for the doctor. Ah, so he really did mean it when he said that? I thought he'd change his mind and stay with the crew he already was with, someone else said as Law shook his head, knowing the determination that came from the chosen people. He's a D, they always follow through on their words. Luffy, no, Mugiwara Yaw is no different, Law said as a few laughed. Law stood up and walked to his main deck, since his submarine had come up from being underwater for so long. I hope we meet again soon, Mugiwara Yaw, Law said to the wind, hoping it would catch the boys' sails and bring them towards one another. Ex-Captain Smoker was shaking as he looked at the picture on the bounty poster. That damn brat. What the hell does he think he's doing? Smoker growled out, causing his partner to look at him in concern. Smoker-san? She asked, not understanding why he was so mad. Becoming a pirate after I trained him so hard. Even though he was angry, Smoker had read the article and couldn't hate the boy even if he had chosen something Smoker hadn't expected. From what he had read, Luffy had saved an entire island from the hands of a pirate ruler, which was something the Marines were supposed to be doing. Do you know this boy, Smoker-san? She asked, taking the bounty poster from him. Yes, I knew him when he was a brat. All three of them, actually. He had gotten a bounty poster of Ace and wasn't very happy to see it, so he did some research into Ace, finding nothing. The boy was a mystery, which was unexpected since he believed him to be one of Vice Admiral Garp's grandchildren. Smoker stood up, needing air, and to get away from that picture with the high bounty on it taunting him. When I see you again I'm going to beat some sense into you boy. Make way to Log Town, that's where he'll be going first if he's heading back to the Grand Line. A few cries had been heard as he gave his order, and the Marine captain made his way to the small island ready to teach his old friend a lesson. You're telling the truth, right? Luffy grabbed Usopp by the shoulders, and looked the man in the eyes as Usopp's sweat dropped at Luffy. Yeah, I've heard that the place we're heading to is the birthplace of the Pirate King Gold Roger. Usopp said to Luffy, who then proceeded to jump around the merry, letting out cheers and laughter. It's also the place they executed him, Luffy, Nami said, looking up from one of her books at the jumping boy she called her captain. But he was born there, Luffy said in more excitement as the crew sighed, knowing that once Luffy had set his sights on something there was no stopping him. I don't care about the Pirate King's birth or death. Zoro started yawning loudly before Luffy growled at him for those words. What I care about is getting some new katanas. Your uncle broke my other two and I don't like fighting without three, Zoro said before looking at Nami, who was leaning on her hands smirking at Zoro, berry signs sparkling behind her brown eyes. Oh, and do you have any money to buy those katanas with? She asked him, a sly tone in her voice causing him to flinch. I'll be asking the treasurer for a loan, I guess, Zoro said as she looked down her nose at him, still smiling. Why, of course, I expect though a 300% interest on the money, of course, she said as Zoro paled at her, but accepted the money due to the fact he did need to get new blades. How much longer, Nami? Usopp asked, taking his telescope away from his eye to look at the redhead as she stopped teasing Zoro in her own way. We should be there shortly, the wind's steady, and we're on the right current, she said. So Luffy began to hop around again in excitement before making his way to the figurehead to keep a lookout. Geez, making all this loud noise while the beautiful Nami is reading. Go be loud elsewhere, shitheads, Sanji shouted at them while putting a fruity treat in front of Nami. Why thank you, Sanji, I'm also feeling a little thirsty, could you make me a sweet drink? She asked him as hearts filled his eyes and he was gone. That guy, Usopp said, watching the trail of dust left behind fade away. Sanji, I want some meat as well, Luffy called into the kitchen as cursing followed that order. Honestly, Nami sighed, but smiled as well because this was her family no matter what. Oh, I think I see it, Luffy cheered to the others who came towards the figurehead to see for themselves. Yes, that's the place, Nami verified as Luffy threw his arms in the air in happiness. One last stop, then we can go home. Luffy smiled his big toothy grin as Usopp tilted his head at Luffy. By home you don't mean back to Whitebeard's ship, right? He asked as Luffy made a face towards his sniper. No, back to home waters. I'm not going home unless I have no other choice, though knowing Ma and the others, the moment we hit home waters they'll be on our tails trying to visit. Luffy scowled at the idea of just setting sail only to have his Ma's protective nature drag him home for what could be weeks, knowing him. Then we'll just have to move fast now, won't we? Zoro asked, waking up and seeing what was going on. Right. Luffy nodded, but knew that if Marco or Ace wanted him home to visit they'd probably find a way to do just that even if he didn't want to visit them just yet. We'll be there soon. Zoro, you should go with someone so we can locate you at all times, Nami said, causing Zoro to scowl at her. Luffy, why not take Usopp with you? She suggested, but Luffy had wandered away, not listening to her instructions anymore. I'd give it up if I were you, Usopp said to Nami, giving her a sad smile knowing how much patience she was probably using with the captain and first mate. I won't, she pouted as he shook his head at her stubbornness. This crew for better or worse fit together perfectly. See ya guys. Luffy jumped from the boat to the shore once they got close enough. Luffy, we need to dock the ship properly, Nami yelled at her laughing captain as he ran towards the middle of the city. Zoro, taking this opportunity to jump off and run ahead as well, caught Nami's eyes for a second. Zoro, she yelled, but he refused to turn back around to even look at her since he knew where he needed to go, right? Like I said, Nami, it's best to just give it up when it comes to those two. Usopp laughed while helping her dock the ship. Sanji, can you give us a hand? Usopp turned to ask the chef, who had also vanished at some point it seemed. Those three, she growled, closing her eyes because when she caught them she was going to pound their heads so hard Luffy would actually feel it. Luffy was running around the town looking at everything, excitement lighting up his eyes as the people walked by him giving him strange looks. So this is where the Pirate King was born and died, he whispered to himself, but something was nagging him a bit. So where am I? He had wandered the town for a while, but had yet to come to where the Pirate King was actually executed. Wandering some more, Luffy knew he'd find the execution place sooner or later, but a feeling had stopped him in his tracks. It had been a long time he felt someone strong like his grandpa close by, so closing his eyes he searched around. It felt familiar, like maybe his grandpa was in the area, but at the same time it was weaker than that. While searching the area, a few other strong feelings hit him hard. One of them he recognized instantly, and smiled. "You came all the way here just to see me off, did you?" Luffy chuckled, and then ran in an opposite direction than the first one. If the person was one of his grandpa's people, he didn't feel like talking to them right now. He also had another person to find before he left this place, but first he needed to find that execution place. Nami was following a small map towards a shop that had been written down on the note from Luffy's mother figure. She was excited to get to the place someone like Marco had recommended her to go to prepare for their adventure into the Grand Line. "Welcome." Someone came towards Nami, smiling kindly but eyeing her all the same. "Hi, I'm looking for this." Nami put the drawing from the letter down in front of the man who eyed it before turning his dull green eyes up at her from over his large glasses. "I take it you're traveling to the Grand Line then?" he asked, pushing the paper back towards her. "Something like that." She smiled sweetly at him, but something about this man was throwing her off a bit. "The Grand Line isn't for children, come back with an adult, and I'll give you what you want," he said, turning her away, causing Nami's cheeks to tint red in anger. "Paradise is for the strong, and that's exactly what I am," she whispered dangerously at him as his brows rose, startled. She knew the other name for the Grand Line. "Sounds like you are a little more knowledgeable than I expected, but that isn't a good enough answer to get this from me, miss," he said, now putting the item she was searching for on the counter but watching her carefully. "That right there isn't for me," she said, pointing to the log pose as he stared at her, a look crossing his face filled with confusion. "Then bring the one it's for, and I'll consider selling it to him," he said, ready to put it away, sad his game was over so soon. "You misunderstand," Nami said, suddenly stopping him from moving, her brown eyes locked with his green. "This isn't for me. It's for my captain, and crew, my family. It's going to be my job to ensure they make it safely through the Grand Line, and if that will help me get there, then I'll do whatever it takes to get it from you," she said to him as a small smile fell on his lips at the girl's words. "And what does your captain want in the Grand Line?" he asked her, his fingers touching the log pose. "He's going to become the king of the pirates," she said it with as much conviction. Luffy said those words with startling the man. Closing his eyes, he pushed the item towards her carefully, not to break it, as Nami stared at it, now close to her own. "NY pirates come and go through this town asking for the same thing, only to return broken from those waters. You're young, so I assume your captain is just as. What makes you think you can survive in those waters when many others have fallen before you?" he asked her, testing her one last time. "Because my captain was born there," she said, looking out the window and smiling. "He grew up there with the Grand Line as his home. If he can survive there, and still smile like he does, then I should be able to survive there, if not for me but for him and all of our dreams." The man laughed lightly, surprised by this strong-willed woman, and a strong desire to meet this captain she spoke so fondly of. "It's yours. Promise me you won't return here soon," he said, not accepting any price from her, because she was kind enough to play with his game. "The next time we return here, Luffy will be king," she said, taking the log pose and strapping it to her wrist. "Luffy, huh?" he said as Nami waved goodbye and left the shop. "I guess I'll keep an eye out for a pirate named Luffy." Smoker's hockey was good, but not the strongest out there. He had sensed the boy close by with his observation, but the moment he began to follow the feelings, the boy had moved in a whole different direction. "So we're playing cat and mouse, Luffy?" he asked, annoyed that the boy probably knew someone was chasing him so he would avoid Smoker for as long as possible. "I'm not letting you leave until I've kicked some sense into that dull head of yours," Smoker said to himself as he looked around, realizing someone was missing from his sights. Now where has that girl gone? Tashigi had been by his side only moments before, but her attentions had brought her following a green-haired swordsman into a shop selling katanas. Zoro hadn't wanted to use the money from the sea witch, but knew without her help he would become only a one-sword style, and that just didn't work for him. Finding the shop was rather difficult. He had been given directions from a few people, and even a sign, but they must have been lying to him. How else could he not find the place? Not looking where he was going, Because of his annoyance from the lying people, he walked right into someone else, causing her to hit the ground hard. "Watch where you're going," she shouted at him, feeling around for her fallen glasses. Zoro picked them up, ready to give them back to her, but froze when she looked at him. "Kuina," he whispered quietly, and without realizing it he had crushed her glasses in his hand. My glasses, you're going to pay me back for those," she shouted at him as he looked down at the broken shards in his hands. Sighing, Zoro passed her the broken frame, and helped her up before offering her to come with him to find the witch he called Nami. "No, I want you to come with me," she said simply, and started to lead the way, much to his annoyance. Following behind her, Zoro couldn't help but count the similarities between her and his old friend, and honestly it was freaking him out more than anything has in a long time. Not even seeing Luffy's rubber powers for the first time freaked him out as much as this. "I take it you don't have any money," she said to him, but he was so struck all he could do was answer her awkwardly. "You look like you're carrying a bunch of secrets, aren't you?" she asked him, turning to face him now, but seeing her face, and how much she looked like her, just put him off more. "What did you do? Did you walk out on your wife leaving her children? Do you have a sick mother waiting at home?" she asked him, but his mind was spinning. How did she go from him walking out on someone to being a poor woman's son? "Oi," he said to her, annoyed by her questions. "Whatever, it doesn't matter, we're here," she said, pointing to the marine base as Zoro's mouth dropped slightly, following her inside. "You will be working off your debt," she said, handing him a bucket that he dropped on the ground and crossed his arms. "Like hell I am." He knew Luffy would have a great laugh with that stupid chef if he had to mop the marine's floors. "You owe me for breaking my glasses," she reminded him as he glared at the look-alike. "I said I can get you the money for them." As much as he didn't want to ask Nami for more money, he would rather beg her than clean for the marines any day. "And I said that you will help me out." She was stubborn, he'd give her that, but he knew how to deal with stubborn. He had Luffy after all. "I'll leave this to you," she said as a fellow marine came in, addressing her. "But I just said," he began, but she had started to walk away, ignoring him. "Geez, I think she might just be worse than Luffy and Nami combined," he growled, picking up a mop that had been leaning against the wall, and getting this crap done so he could go. Finishing what he was ever going to do for the marines, he placed the mops back against the wall, and emptied the bucket, then wandered around. "How the hell do I get out of this maze?" he asked himself under his breath, but heard a familiar sound, one that had followed him his entire life. Looking down from a balcony, he saw the girl fighting with her swords, wooden of course, but in his mind he saw his old friend, and that familiar ache beat in his heart. "Oi you! You're the pirate hunter who recently joined up with Straw Hat Luffy," some random shouted as Zoro fought the urge to roll his eyes at their tone. "Recently, I've been with Luffy for a while now," Zoro said before placing a hand on his head at their looks. "That sounded weirder than it should have. What I mean is that I've been on Luffy's crew for a long time, but it doesn't matter here." He had enough, and their presence was giving him a headache. Picking up the leftover mops he had put down earlier, he used them like swords, knocking everyone out. "Now what?" He looked back at the girl who had finished up her fight, and sighed, reaching into his pocket, pulling out some money. "I can't believe I'm using my own cash for something stupid like this. Nami would ask for double in return if I gave her loan out to someone like her though." He pulled a piece of paper from the unconscious marine, and found a pen on the guy as well, writing her a small note. "For your glasses, Z. I've had it here, time to go find that stupid shop." Wandering the streets, Zoro almost walked by it, but the giant swords marking the sign stopped him in his tracks. "So this must be the place then?" He walked in to find the man sleeping at the counter, so he chose to look around first, and see what types of swords this place had. "Oi!" Zoro said loudly, causing the man to wake up with a start. "Ah, a customer. How may I help you?" he asked with the overly cheerful customer service voice. "I've only got 100,000, so what can I get with that?" Zoro asked bluntly as the man made a disappointed face. "Nothing that fancy," he said, pointing to the katana Zoro was really looking at, so the swordsman stepped away from him, no longer caring about it. "Anything will do, really." Zoro just needed some new blades until he got enough money to get the best ones. "That blade you have, can I see it?" The shopkeeper was freaking out, but Zoro reluctantly put his blade up on the counter. This blade was a momentum of Kuina, so he didn't really like the idea of others so casually touching it. Much to Zoro's annoyance, the shopkeeper began to name prices for the sword, wanting to buy it off of him. He was about to open his mouth and tell the man off for his rudeness until his second annoyance of this town came running in asking about a sword. "Oh, it's you," she said so casually in a happy voice as he began to try breathing exercises so he didn't just beat the two people in front of him to a pulp. The girl, just to throw salt on the wound, then pushed the money he had left back towards him, stating that she didn't want it, but not before scolding him for leaving the job she had given him. Zoro had just about enough of her until she took a look at his katana that the shopkeeper was trying to buy off of him. She starbout it with information he himself hadn't heard before so he might forgive her this one time. "You stupid girl. You're bad for my business," the shopkeeper yelled at her, but Zoro wanted to laugh at him. There was no way in hell he was going to give up Kuina's katana. The man continued to go on about some shit Zoro wasn't actually that interested in. If he really needed to, he would get the information on his sword himself. "Geez, what's his problem?" Zoro asked, walking away towards a cheap area for swords, not wanting to listen to that stupid man or the marine girl copycat anymore. "You really like swords, don't you?" the girl asked him as he began to fumble through a few of them. "Yeah, I guess." He wasn't really listening to her though. "You must be a great swordsman as you carry around 3 of them, right?" she asked him. But he didn't answer her, just check out a sword in his hands before putting it back, not satisfied with it. "There's a bounty hunter who carries 3 swords as well. He too is a fantastic swordsman named Roranoa," she said to him, causing him to look up slightly at her and nod. "I've heard that name a lot." He went back to searching through them as she nodded, but frowned. "He uses his swords for evil, killing people, and bringing them in for money. That's not the true way of a swordsman," she said, crossing her arms as Zoro closed his eyes, annoyed. He needed to find someone, so bringing in bounties was enough to get food, he said as she shook her head. "He went about it the wrong way," she snapped, then apologized for yelling at him so he stopped searching to look at her. "Someday I'll free the Maitu from the S of the world," she said as Zoro touched his own blade softly. "Wado Ichimonji, are you going to risk trying to take him as well?" Zoro opened his blade, letting the light reflect off of it, slightly blinding her a little. "Oh, of course not, but the others I will save," she started as Zoro smirked, placing his hand on a katana in the barrel, and freezing. Turning quickly, he looked at the blade, but it felt weird. It felt bloodthirsty and angry, but what weirded him out the most was that it felt like it was calling him. "That blade," she said in excitement, pulling her book out, but Zoro was attached to the katana, and its strong calling that he couldn't even acknowledge her at this moment. "I can't sell you that sword," the shopkeeper yelled as the girl turned to him to argue, but Zoro pulled it out and unsheathed the blade, letting the power of it hit his hands and sting. "You crave war," he whispered to it, his eyes darting towards the marine, and the shopman then back to the blade where he let black spread from his fingertips down the hilt and onto the silver blade itself. "So do I?" He let his haki fade as the shopkeeper started to talk to him. "Every swordsman who has ever used one of those blades has ended up dead. They're cursed," he said to Zoro, who was still looking down at the blade as if challenging it to harm him. "I'm interested. How much do you want?" he asked the shopkeeper, who began to freak, but Zoro looked at him, a dark glint behind his silver eyes. "Then how about this? Your curse versus my luck." He gave his familiar grin to the blade, the darkness turning his eyes the same color as the blade he held. "Do your worst," he said to it before throwing it up in the air and sticking his arm out, letting the sword choose its master. Zoro closed his eyes, but his concentration slipped when in his mind's eye he could almost see the aura of the sword he had thrown into the air. "You can see all my attacks even before I use them." "How?" Zoro asked the 14-year-old Luffy, who frowned, trying to think of how to explain it to his new friend. "It's like I see it in my head first, then you do it." But Zoro needed a better answer than that. "My brothers call it observation haki, where you can see another's movements before they see their movements. Sometimes it's like an aura, sometimes I actually see it. I dunno what else to say." Luffy sighed, sitting down in the grass, pouting at not being able to explain it better. Sabo was the one for words, not him. "So if I train harder I can unlock this observation haki like you?" Zoro asked Luffy, who nodded quickly. "MN." Zoro hummed at that response. "How will I know I've unlocked it or not?" Luffy thought about it pretty hard by the way his cheeks were beginning to darken and eyes were scrunched up. "You'll just know when it happens, trust me." With his arm out, Zoro saw the aura of the blade, letting it fall. But instead of moving his arm away, he let the blade decide the outcome of the battle as it gracefully glided across his arm, lodging itself into the wooden floor board. "I'll take it," he said to everyone present who were all pale and shocked. "Oi girl, you have good eyes for blades. Pick me out a new one." It sounded more like an order, but she was too shocked to argue back at him, so she nodded silently. "Wait one moment," the shopkeeper shouted as Zoro turned towards him ready to fight if he refused to sell him this sword. "This blade is the best one I've got in this shop. One that can make even a weak swordsman into the best," he said, the black sheath on the blade hitting the light just perfectly, catching Zoro's eyes, but his pockets knew he couldn't spend much. "I can't buy that, I don't have that much on me," he reminded the man, but the shopkeeper was firm now. "I don't expect anything for either of these blades. It's been a long time since I've run into a great swordsman like yourself," the man said as Zoro walked towards him to check out the blade properly. "They say the katana chooses its master. I pray you have good luck," the shopkeeper said as Zoro placed his hand on the new katana before him and felt his smile grow. "You're just as angry, aren't you? I'll take them both then." So that's the execution platform," Luffy said in awe, looking up at the wooden tower where Ace's father had been killed many years ago. "Well, I'm not going to really know what it looks like from down here, so let's get a climbing," he cheered, running towards it, Smoker following the feeling he had come to know to be Luffy all the way to the middle of the town. "Oi kid, get down from there," a police officer shouted up at Luffy, who was enjoying the view from on top of the platform. Why Pops, I'm not doing anything bad," Luffy called down to the man and his partner. "This place is historical, so we can't have brats like you breaking it," he shouted up at him before some person wearing a cloak hit him in the back of the head, knocking him out. Who the hell are you, lady?" the partner of the officer asked in anger and confusion before checking on his partner. "Me?" she asked in a sweet voice, removing her hood and looking up at Luffy with a smirk on her beautiful face, and giggled a little. "Luffy my dear, I've been looking all over for you," she said in a sweet sing-song voice that made his skin crawl slightly. "Really, I've never met you before at all," he said, but his eyes were drifting up towards the sky and how dark it was suddenly getting. The East Blue rarely had major storms from what Haruta told him, and this one seemed more paradise-like than anything. "Pay attention to me," she shouted at Luffy, who had been ignoring her, a beautiful woman, and contemplating the weather. "Sorry, but I don't know you," he said bluntly, because maybe he really would like to get off this platform since those dark clouds were moving faster than he first thought. If only Nami were here to tell him what they meant. "Don't you remember, darling? Your strong fist really moved me. I was a changed woman after that," she said, placing her hand on her cheek adoringly, his eyes glazed over in memory. Luffy remained silent because honestly this woman was freaking him out in ways Marco would have been angry about. "Still don't remember him? How about this? Who is the most beautiful woman in this world?" she asked, turning around and facing a crowd of adoring fans, mostly men with hearts in their eyes. "You are my dear," a few shouted to click, but Luffy couldn't put his finger on it. Maybe it wasn't that important after all. "It's me, you idiot, Alvida." She finally lost her patience with Luffy, whose eyes widened before he began to look around for the fat lady. "What? Where?" she growled at his reaction while others chuckled. "I'm right here," she shouted at him as he tilted his head, not really sure what to make of her. "After you moved me with that powerful punch, I sought out a devil fruit that could make me strong enough to stand before you once again. I ate the smooth fruit, which has made my skin so beautiful that nothing can touch me, for it all bounces off," she said as Luffy's eyes darted upwards, rain beginning to drip but not pour. "Unfortunately, my appearance has changed as well. I have lost my beautiful freckles," she said, looking so sad at the idea of her losing the weakest part of her look. Luffy wasn't sure if he should tell her or not that her freckles were not the big change. "And to think I came all this way only for you to be defeated," she sighed, confusing Luffy, who once again looked towards the sky in worry. His crew was scattered around this island, and the storm coming in looked really bad. "I don't know what you're talking about, but I should probably go now. My crew is waiting for me, and a storm's coming in, so..." Luffy tried to slink away only to be pulled back by the collar of his shirt being forced down, and then bound down on the platform. "Looks like you let your guard down, Straw Hat Brat." Luffy recognized the voice, but couldn't for the life of him put a name on the person it belonged to. This day was supposed to be fun. He was very annoyed now as the area began to fill up with both pirates, and people who were screaming about the pirates in the area. "Buggy pirates?" Luffy asked, catching word of the name being said. "That's right, Straw Hat. We have some history, you and I. You caused me the most amount of pain, and for that, my beautiful Alvida, and I decided to team up and seek you out just to kill you ourselves," he said as Luffy looked around the area waiting for Zoro or Sanji to come to his rescue. "Now we can begin our execution. Honestly, I expected more from you. Your hockey skills are stronger than most, and yet I still was able to get behind you. Why is that, Straw Hat?" Buggy asked him as Luffy looked up at him, a small smirk on his face. "Because I know you won't kill me," he said with confidence that startled Buggy and many others in the area. "And what makes you so sure, huh?" Buggy asked him as thunder clapped loudly close to them. "Because my big brother wouldn't like that very much," he smiled, confusing Buggy a whole lot more. "And why in the world should I care about your brother?" he asked Luffy, who smirked more. "Because he doesn't really like it when I'm in trouble." Luffy looked forwards as Sanji and Zoro entered the area. Sanji began to kick a few of the weaker pirates while Zoro for some reason looked a bit upset. Maybe it was because Luffy was being held down, but a feeling told Luffy that it was something else entirely. "Looks like my crew's giving your friends some trouble. Once I've killed you, I'm going to return to the Grand Line and become the king of the pirates." Buggy laughed, pulling out a sword as Luffy looked around a little concerned now, but he frowned in anger as the clown's words. "You're wrong. I'm going to be the one who will be the king of the pirates," Luffy shouted for all to hear, freezing many in the crowd, bringing whispers from civilians, and even created a shocked marine captain named Smoker. "What an idiot you are. Where's this brother you've been warning me all about, huh? Why hasn't he come to save you yet?" Buggy laughed as Luffy paled, not really wanting to end it like this. "This is it, Straw Hat Luffy, this is the end for you and all your wild dreams." Buggy lifted the sword in the air as a realization hit Luffy. While Zoro was strong, he couldn't fly to save him, and Sanji could only do so much on his own. He really had hoped his brother would show up and kick this clown's ass, but Luffy closed his eyes before taking a deep breath and shouting, "Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji. Don't be mad, but I'm dead." He shouted to them as Zoro's eyes widened at the look on Luffy's face, and shame filled both Sanji and Zoro's hearts for not being strong enough to protect their captain. Just as Buggy was bringing the blade down on Luffy, a bolt of lightning struck the blade, lighting up the platform. As Buggy screamed out in pain, Luffy laughed because the lightning tickled him a bit. Once the platform had been burnt to the ground, and everyone was in shock, Luffy laughed, picking up his hat, and ordered his friends to get moving. They had done enough on this island, and it was time to go to paradise. Once they had gotten away from the area, Zoro grabbed Luffy by the shoulders, stopping him, letting Sanji run ahead to the ship. "Zoro," Luffy said, the swordsman looking his captain and friend in the eyes. "Don't you ever do that again." He was serious. The look Luffy had given was so peaceful but downright terrifying. "I'm sorry," was all Luffy could say, because the look Zoro was giving him right now was one he had never seen before. It was a mixture of anger and worry. "Just be more careful, you're supposed to have hockey, so use it, dummy," he scolded before walking ahead of Luffy, then turned back, raising a brow at the teenager. "You go on ahead if you can. There's someone I need to see before I leave here," Luffy said as Zoro frowned at him and crossed his arms. "Go on, it's just my brother." Zoro had never met any of Luffy's brothers, so he wasn't sure which one had come all this way to see him. "If you're not back in an hour, I'm coming to look for you," he said sternly to Luffy, who laughed loudly as rain began to fall. "Deal," he said before running in an opposite direction than his ship, following a feeling he knew to be his older brother's. The closer Luffy got to his brother, the wider his smile grew in size, until of course someone had to step in his way and shrink it all back down to nothing. "I thought I'd find you here," Smoker said as Luffy faced him, his hand already black with hockey and an unreadable expression covering his face. "I wasn't expecting to see you. I thought it was Gramps by the feeling," he admitted, but his face remained the same, unreadable. "It's my job to keep pirates off of these waters, Luffy, you know that," Smoker said to him as Luffy nodded. "I refuse to be a marine," he needed to make that clear. "So you've chosen a path that leads to pain and suffering?" Smoker shouted as Luffy growled at him. "I've chosen a path that leads to freedom. I've always been a pirate, Smokey. You like me then. Why can't you like me now?" He was truly annoyed now. "Monkey D. Luffy, or rather, Straw Hat Luffy, as a marine it is my job to stop you from returning to the Grand Line," he said, pulling his jute out threateningly as Luffy let the black spread up his forearm to his elbow, preparing in a battle he knew would come. Smoker did feel a bit of regret fighting the kid he had grown to respect and care for, but this was the path he had chosen, so be it. Luffy's punches landed where he wanted them to, but Smoker was a slight bit faster than him right now, so he got in a few hits as well where Luffy couldn't see them coming. "You've gotten stronger," Smoker said, appreciating the battle as Luffy nodded back at him, a smile replacing the growl. "You too," he replied, ready to go back in for more, only for a blue blur to jump between them, a pipe in his hands blocking them both off from one another. "Don't you have somewhere you've got to be, Luffy?" Sabo said, but the look he gave Luffy was a weird look. I did promise Zoro I'd only be an hour at most," he said, crossing his arms as Smoker froze, seeing another one of his brats. "You're lucky I haven't decided to call your ma and tell him about that execution platform stunt of yours," he scolded, his voice low and even angry. "Well, if you had have just shown up and saved me a big deal." Luffy was expecting Sabo to come and help him, that's why he let the clown guy pin him down, or at least that's what he'd tell anyone if they asked about that incident. "What are you doing here anyways?" Luffy asked his brother, who realized that Smoker was starting to come back after the shock. "Dragon wanted to make sure you had a good start. I wanted to see my little brother, so we decided to come together." Sabo shrugged as Smoker glared at the name Dragon. "But it must have taken you guys forever to get here." Luffy knew Sabo would probably have come through from Paradise, and that was a long trip. "Not really, we were pretty close by, so we crossed over through the calm belt." "Another one of you has shown up. Will Ace make an appearance as well?" Smoker asked. But Sabo frowned, which worried Luffy a bit. "What's wrong with Ace?" Luffy whispered softly and carefully, but Sabo shook his head. "Nothing's wrong with Ace, at least nothing that I know of anyways." Luffy felt something off, but chose not to question it. If Sabo knew something, he'd tell Luffy, so nothing had to be wrong. "Are you here to fight me as well, brat?" Smoker asked Sabo, who dug his pipe into the ground and looked at the marine. "Not really, it's just been a really long time since I've seen my baby brother. I wanted to congratulate him on his first bounty before the others did," Sabo said, smiling sweetly to Smoker, who crossed his arms looking at the blonde before him. "So you came all the way here to do that, did you? Just where have you been, boy?" Smoker asked Sabo, who shook his head at the man. "Some things are better left unsaid, Smoker." Luffy felt the rain begin to soak into his clothes and a pair of eyes watching his back. As much as he felt like staying with Sabo and Smoker, he was a little curious about the one watching him. "You can go, Luffy, I'm just glad I got to see you before Marco and the others got to," Sabo said, this time pointing his pipe towards Smoker. "Your fight is with me. Luffy has places to be right now." Luffy nodded and waved goodbye to Smoker, but not before giving Sabo a hug from the side, causing the man to laugh and pat him on the head slightly, his pipe still held in place. "It was good to see ya, kid," Sabo whispered to Luffy, who nodded, hugging tighter before letting his brother go and running towards the presence, calling him forward. "Now where were we?" Sabo asked Smoker with a smile. Luffy made his way through the streets soaking wet from the rain, but excitement and nervousness filling his gut. "You've caused quite the trouble here, haven't you?" The voice caused Luffy to stop walking, but he didn't turn around either, just listened to the man who was apparently his father. "It's not like I planned on causing trouble," he pouted, but the man didn't laugh. "The next generation is beginning," he said simply as Luffy stood still waiting for more. "A new era is upon us. What will you do, Luffy?" he asked, but the boy didn't answer him right away. Luffy took a deep breath, still refusing to turn around, and smiled. "I'll do whatever I want." With that, Luffy left his father there, a smile on the man's face at his son's answer. Luffy ran the rest of the way through the rain-soaked town, with thunder crashing in the skies above him, pushing him forward. "Luffy!" Nami called, a raincoat over her body protecting herself from the elements. Zoro was eyeing his captain, but closed his eyes in relief when he saw Luffy was alright. "What took you so long, you shithead?" Sanji shouted at him as Luffy laughed. "I ran into Sabo," he said to Sanji, whose eyes widened before a light smile fell across his face at the memory of the blonde brother. "Sabo's here?" Nami had met Sabo once before, and even Usopp knew the brother. But he's going to be leaving soon, so we should go as well," Luffy ordered, and a cry could be heard as the crew began to follow their captain. "Let's go, everyone, let's go back to Paradise together." From an alleyway close by, "So what did you think?" Sabo asked Dragon, who stood tall even with the rain and wind brushing against his dark green cloak, the same one he had worn 17 years ago when he dropped off a baby to a pirate crew. He has much growing to do, but in time, Dragon didn't finish his sentence as Sabo smiled under his top hat, his eyes overshadowed, but were filled with pride for his baby brother. He might just change the world. Sabo finished for the man who had taught him so much before following him towards a ship waiting to bring them back to the open seas. Smoker stood at the shore with his partner beside him. Her eyes looked a little red, meaning she had probably been crying at some point today. "What should we do, Smoker-san?" she asked him as he gripped his jute tightly, eyes narrowing towards the raging waters. "We follow them. It's time we returned to the Grand Line."